Might get started this morning. It's great to see you all here. I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to the Westfest 2025. This is the third annual event hosted by the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects with our Western Sydney locals, Cumberland City Council and Street Furniture Australia. Last year, the 2024 event was all about climate action in the public realm. I was very excited to attend the event last year with my colleagues. I learned a lot about climate action. It was a great inspiration to me, and I hope that you find today's panellists equally inspiring. This year, at a time when Western Sydney and our capital cities are trying to meet housing, supply and infrastructure demands, we're asking, how can we do density better? Please join me in welcoming our live stream audience who are watching today from around Australia. The morning will start with 4 rapid 10-minute talks, followed by a break for morning tea. After the break, we'll return for 2 more short talks, followed by a Q&A with our 6 speakers. We'll then have a second panel to look at the specifics of designing with density in Western Sydney. I'd now like to invite Uncle Graham Davis-King from Darebin Land Council for our Welcome for Country.
Hello, my name's Graham Davis-King. I'm from the Darebin Local Aboriginal Land Council. And the Darebin Local Aboriginal Land Council is the biggest, would you believe, the biggest property owner in Western Sydney. It currently manages and actually owns 18,500 hectares of land in Western Sydney. So quite a big stakeholder in Western Sydney, and and one of the biggest landowners in Western Sydney. Darebin also means the name of the Hawkesbury and Nepean River, so that's a really important point there. What Darebin means, and but there's another meaning of Darebin too. So the river has these connotations of a journey of people, of human beings, as well as nature. So those are 2 very important things that the Land Council in this region here considers all the time. Actually, the Aboriginal community in Western Sydney, which there is 38,000 Aboriginal people in these areas that we're 8 local government areas. So Parramatta, about half of Cumberland, half of Parramatta, about most of Hill Shire, all of Hawkesbury Shire, Blue Mountains, Blacktown, Penrith, and so those are, and Fairfield also, the western parts of Fairfield Council. So that's and we also we're very, how could I put it, very observant about the communities in those local government areas. We're particularly based in Penrith with 10,000 Aboriginal people, as well as Blacktown with over 10,000 Aboriginal people there. So that's the makeup of our population. But also touching on Darebin, there's 2 things I want to share with you. Well, first of all, our first land claim, and which was in 1983. When the Land Rights Act was incorporated. And so what happened there was when it was incorporated, the community decided we want the land back. So what we did was we had a big meeting, Land Council meeting, and we went to court, got the Land Environment Court to consider a claim on the old Sackville Aboriginal Reserve. So this is Barramadigal lands, by the way, here. And Aboriginal people were moved off these lands. Some Aboriginal people got a bit of an education. They went to Parramatta Institute here and got an education off Samuel Marsden, and many became very famous letter writers, particularly with Queen Victoria, and they was able to write about land claims. So that's what they wrote about, and successfully too. That's what happened and another place where they moved people to is the old Sackville Aboriginal Reserve. And on there, that's where the judges were invited. And there's a rock pagoda about the size of this platform here, although it's a fair bit higher. It's about 6, 7, about 8 foot high, and and there's a fig tree growing over the whole lot of it. It was quite a big fig tree, and you think of the roots and that hanging over this big rock pagoda. And anyway, so what was explained by Auntie Maisie Kavanagh, who's a very, very important elder in Western Sydney. She's a great grandmother. And so when I visit her house, we're visiting the whole community nearly in her own family, just one family there. And they're very important people, Auntie Maisie Kavanagh. And she told a story about this little tree was asking for help because it was going to flood, as it does out here. And there's fires in that too. But it's particularly going to flood on the Hawkesbury River or Jirrabin. And what happened was the big tree that was there heard all this and said, I'm here, I'm really big and strong, and I'll hold us in place and we'll survive this flood together. And they did do that. And then one day, they survived many floods. And then one day the rock said, look, I can't hold on any longer. The next flood's going to wash me down. But this time, the tree had grown a fair bit bigger and said, look, I'm so big and strong now, I'm going to wrap my arms around you and we'll survive these floods together. And so that's what they did together. And they're still there today. And that's why I think we're successful, because what being a human being is about, especially in human being in Aboriginal culture, is about is helping one another, help your community, help its family and community all the time, and helping one another. And when we started doing that, that's when we become fully human beings, helping one another, looking out for one another. That's when we become that as human beings. Then on that place at Old Sackville Aboriginal Reserve, there was an Aboriginal man of high degree, and his name was George Lowndes, and he's related to, he was on that place amongst Aboriginal women and men of high degree, and so people moved to that place. Later on they moved to La Perouse, so they're at La Perouse today, a lot of those people. And anyway, there's a song that he sang about three things. What do we have? What's the rules and protocols? And who are we in terms of the stages of the EMU, which is very high law and very important law for, I think, even for us today in this society. So what the song says is Wooba Wooba Minya Mundi, or Wallaby Wallaby What Many, or there's lots of wallaby, or black kangaroo, or there's lots of totems. And we also do rock art research. So we look after about 11,000, would you believe, 11,000 rock art sites, just in Western Sydney, in the Blue Mountains alone, without down here. And so there's tens of thousands of Aboriginal sites that we look after. And yeah, that's how much abundance that we have. And in those sites, there's could be a dozen totems. One site, the Eagles Reach, got 200 totems in there. So much totemic knowledge there. And then look at us, the totemic knowledge that we have here. So abundance all around here. And then the rules and protocols. Ungawi, Kuli, Birung. Ungawi means we sit down with the fire, and Ung means the soul. And it's also to do with agency and sovereignty. When we talk about sovereignty, we're talking about identity, which is land, language, family, totem, Aboriginal law, belonging and identity. So that's our identity, which is our Aboriginal sovereignty. And that's really, agency is really our bread and butter. And that's really important. We sit down well on the land. That's what that means. And Kuli is the law, and Birong, that town next to Bankstown, that means Venus. Venus touches on the Seven Sisters story. And the Seven Sisters story is really important because that's our creation story. That's when we began to help each other, especially the men and women's business, when we started surrounding the women, giving birth to the little ones, the next generations. When we did that, that's our creation, when we started sharing and looking after one another. That's the Seven Sisters story in a nutshell, our creation story. It took me 6 years to do that, by the way, when doing ceremony. it took me taken 6 years just to do that. So I'm not going to do 6 years of being out here today, but or even a corroboree, which would take several hours to do that. But suffice to say, that's our creation story. And so Angui Kuli Birong, that's the protocols here. And then who are we in terms of stages of the emu? Mati Mati Wiri, or Nes Kulamon, or where the little ones are, the little babies are, or in this case the emu eggs, but where the little ones are. This is our people. This is our community, family and community. Wanko, or those little baby striped emus, or young people. And we will walk beside them and mentor them and care for them and be there for them, because that's our future. And then Kuli Birung Mariong. So Kuli is the law, Birung Venus, to do with the Seven Sisters story. I recommend if you get a chance to see it. Central Australia, they're still doing that dance. And with what they call the Kungajura, the women's corroboree or culture dance culture group, Kungajura, but the Seven Sisters. So Angui said Kuli Birung Mariong, the adult emu. Of course, this is the adult emu. And Atul Mati, we ascend to the nest. And this is where we've ascended to. This is the eldership of what we're talking about today in Western Sydney. And congratulations from Durban for the celebration that you're having. And this is great. And we'll be celebrating with you. And we intend to. And that's, we're walking and working together as one, as a community. So that's really what the law is in this old song. And that old song, because I'd studied linguistics, so it's at least 5,000 years old, but it could be 8,000 years old. And but that's how old this protocol is. But I think it's as old as humanity, because I think we all do resonate with those three things: abundance, the rules, and who we are, and because we live it. And that's important. Uba wuba minya mandi, angui koli birung, mati weary, wanko koli birung mariong ato mati, uba minya mandi, angui koli birung, mati weary, wanko koli birung mariong ato mati, Gill. So that's the song from the land, right underneath the ground here, and it's a really old song, and like I said, Durban is the journey of people, and you heard that journey of people from little ones to big ones, and we're on this huge journey. Durban we're actually taking this even beyond, where society is moving towards, our culture, our community is walking towards. And so we're going beyond. And that's what Durban really means, is we're going beyond. And even if it's street furniture, it's very important, because that's a sitting down place. And that's what Angui is, the sitting down places that we're putting together. So once again, from Durban Land Council, congratulations for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing in our community in Western Sydney. This is a celebration of our community and of our peoples in Western Sydney. And what I'd like to say in Yampa language, I'm a Yampa Wiradjuri person, is Mai Kauka Yamakara. Hello, welcome everyone. Ngali Mai Ngā Ngindu Yamakara Ngurumbang Durban Local Aboriginal Land Council Incorporated Area. So welcome to this incorporated area, this camp world of Durban Land Council, but with you also. And no, thank you for having us here, inviting us here, and we are walking beside you. I can assure you of that. And that's all I've got to say, but congratulations and thank you for having us here. I'm going to play a bit of ditch. I forgot about that. I'm going to do the heartbeat. I think we've got to confiscate this beat, the heartbeat, because for Western Sydney, and I even said that to DCJ a couple of weeks ago. get it for the public service too, because we need to have a beat. And you can't do anything without a heartbeat. And there's two beats. There's the slow one and fast one. The slow one just goes like this. If you can all join in. And then the fast one goes. Okay, let's see how we go. But this is our beat, and we got a lot. Okay. Yep. No, thanks for having us. No, thank you. And yeah, and I think tomorrow night, Durban Land Council's AGM. So I'm looking forward, and you'll have that opportunity to work with us if you want to, and it's your choice. But we're going to walk beside you anyway. So which is our job. No, thank you and congratulations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Uncle Graham. That was incredibly inspiring. I'd like to add a couple of extra words to that. Uncle Graham talked about caring for each other, looking after each other, and using our agency and our knowledge to do that and to go beyond. So if you can take some of those words and that incredible welcome to country and use it as inspiration for what you hear today and what you take from it into your work, I think that would be an amazing legacy that we can remember from today's gathering and today's talks. I'd just like to say a couple of words from the position of the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. And it's an incredible privilege to be part of this event that's also supported by and hosted by Street Furniture Australia and by Cumberland City Council. It's a great opportunity for AILA to be involved. It's a wonderful opportunity for our members to connect to each other and to connect with our wider practice. It's a great opportunity to learn and gather more information and apply our knowledge to change the world. This is a wonderful topic, designing for density. It's never been a more important time to think about our future young ones, our future communities, and hoping that we can walk together and grow better with density done better. It's never been a more important time to be a landscape architect, and I'm so proud of that. The design of public spaces and our connection to green spaces has never been more critical to thinking about designing with density. So now I'd like to welcome, please, Chris Manoski from Cumberland City Council. I'll now pass to Chris from Cumberland City Council to take us to the next part of the event today.
I have to write a speech this time because if I talk off the cuff, I'll be here forever. So please bear with me. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Westfest 2025, Designing for Density, hosted by Street Furniture Australia, an amazing local business in the Cumberland area, the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, and of course, together with Cumberland City Council. So my name is Chris Manoski, and I am the Manager of Place and Economy at Cumberland City Council, and I'm honoured to co-host today's event. So we're gathered here in Parramatta today with the streaming option available for online participants. Everyone online, hello. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. So today's theme is designing for density, and it couldn't be any more timely. As Western Sydney and its surrounding regions continue to grow, we face the crucial questions. How do we deliver high density development while preserving livability, building great amenity, and honouring the landscape, culture, and community that makes this place unique? So as we head towards the end of the year, we ask ourselves another event, what's so important about these events? So why this event matters today is, as our cities densify, the challenge isn't just more buildings. It's building better buildings, better places, better infrastructure. Density done well can enhance livability, sustainability, and social connection. We must design with amenity in mind. Parks, open spaces, public furniture, walkability, and connectivity are all important topics. And importantly, we must design with country, must design with culture, and the community at heart, ensuring that new urbanism reflects the richness of place, not erasing it. Finally, it's about collaboration. Policymakers, designers, landscape architects, placemakers, council, manufacturers, we all have a role to play. So as we progress with today's program, I want to highlight two important things, selfishly, of course, because they're my portfolio at council. but I want to talk about placemaking and smart places. So I want you to think about a few things during today's proceedings. Think about place as the heart of density. So density doesn't succeed through buildings alone. It succeeds when people feel like they belong. Placemaking grounds density in identity, in culture, and in storytelling, ensuring high density environments feel human rather than mechanical. We're designing for everyday experience. It's the micro moments that make the city livable. Shady spots to sit, safe pathways, intuitive navigation, playful elements for families, and green relief. And placemaking is the long game. It isn't a one-off intervention. It's continual stewardship that we all play part of. Programming events, maintaining public spaces, updating amenities, and adapting as communities evolve. And the second thing to think about, like I said, is smart places. Smart cities are people first, not technology first. It's not about gadgets. It's about smarter outcomes. Technology should make life more intuitive, more efficient, more inclusive. We need to be data informed, not data driven. We can use data to understand movement patterns, heat islands, accessibility gaps, and public space usage. But data should guide better human decisions, not replace them. Last page, I promise. Smart cities and placemaking are not separate. The smartest cities in the world use technology to amplify a place's identity. And you'll see a lot of the furniture outside and in our public realm have smart cities elements embedded into what we put out in the public domain. So with that fresh in mind, I'd like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Jeremy Gill from the Committee for Sydney. Jeremy will be followed by Dr. Jennifer Kent, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sydney, my good friend Jay Shankar, the Executive Manager, City Planning Development at Cumberland City Council, and Esther Dickens, Principal at Architectus. I hope you all enjoyed today's event. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. How are you? It's me. My name's Jeremy Gill. I'm the Head of Policy at the Committee for Sydney. I'm going to talk to you about what Chris has just talked to you about and set us up really nicely around doing density well. We've been running a program at the Committee for Sydney. We're an urban policy think tank, and we spend our time thinking about what the future of Sydney looks like across planning, economy, transport, culture, climate resilience, and fairness and equity. I'm going to talk to you today about a Density Done Well program that we've been undertaking now for just over a year, but really part of a kind of a 10-year journey for the committee and a lot of our advocacy. I'm a lapsed landscape architect as well, so I think I often say to landscape architects that the skills that landscape architecture teaches people to think in terms of scale and time and multi-layered thinking is something that we could do more of in terms of thinking about policy and long-term thinking about the future of cities and regions. So thank you to the landscape architecture community for giving me those sort of skills. Linda Corkery was one of my professors way back when I was studying at university. Our density program has started end of last year thinking about what do we mean when we talk about density and starting to get consistency around the language that we use when we talk about density so that we're comparing apples with apples. These are a series of maps looking at different scales of different cities around Australia and the world, looking at our density patterns. And unsurprisingly, Australian cities in particular are relatively low density compared to other cities around the world. It's probably hard to see on the size of this screen, but on this side is Sydney, on that side is London, just showing levels of population and dwelling density and building heights comparing Sydney and London. What's interesting when you look at the comparisons of cities like Sydney and London is that we have pockets of ultra high density, which effectively subsidise pockets of relatively low density. Cities like London are relatively medium density right across the city, but rarely do you see pockets of ultra high density in cities like London. I think from memory, London's density levels are about 64 people per hectare. We're down at about 23 or 24, and you average out across the city. You can do density without doing excessive, well, not excessive, just ultra high heights. Makes it very hard though when you are trying to build up cities from a perspective of low density and incrementally increasing the density over time. What density means is not necessarily super tall buildings, but what it does mean is high connectivity. There is a very strong correlation, unsurprisingly, between the number of train stations, light rail stations, bus stations, and the levels of density that areas can support. And so cities like London, cities like Tokyo are the ones where a metro, light rail, heavy rail system can support density spreading in an even way across a larger area. When you start to look at what that density looks like across Sydney, what you notice is the patterns follow, unsurprisingly, the train lines. Because they have been, we've been doing transit-oriented development without necessarily calling it that since the first train lines were installed and the first light rail lines were built in Sydney over the last 100 or so years. But what you see, these squares show you how big an area is to fit 10,000 people around a train station. And so what you see is in the outer, to the north, to the south, to the west, we take larger and larger spaces to fit 10,000 people, which is a proxy for showing relatively low density. In our cities, in our inner cities, even on the inner cities of the inner suburbs of the lower North Shore, 10,000 people can fit into a smaller area. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing it through super tall buildings, but we're doing it through a concentration of people close to amenities. To Chris's point, it's not just about delivering homes, it's about delivering services, and I want to unpack that a little bit more. Even when you start to think about the centres that people live in, they might not be near train lines, but they're local centres with schools, with high streets, with open spaces. There's a variance right across Sydney in terms of how much space it takes to fit 10,000 people into the city. This highlights, I think, really the opportunity that we have for increasing density in existing areas in Sydney without putting undue pressure on greenfield areas. Now, that's been the position of the state government through their TOD and low and medium density planning reforms. I think what we're going to see, though, and I've got some things to talk to further on, is the practicalities of delivering that. I think what we're going to grapple with, and maybe it's a conversation for the panel as well, about how do we deliver medium density when we look at cities around the world like Paris, like Tokyo, like London, like suburbs in New York, like Brooklyn, where we go, that level of density is great density. It's a density that can support high levels of community, high levels of local services, supports the ability to deliver good public transport access. But in the Australian and particularly the Sydney context, does the land market enable us to deliver that? And by that I mean, does the price that we pay for land and the costs that we need to pay for construction, does that enable us to deliver that sort of density that we hold up as kind of exemplar medium density? And I'm challenged by that, if I'm honest, in the Sydney context. We do a survey every year of Sydney-siders' perspectives on all things across our 6 policy areas. And one of the questions we've been asking over the last couple of years is, do you think an apartment is an appropriate type of building to raise a family? And unsurprisingly, the answer differs depending on generations. People in their 80s and 90s who've been able to have the access to detached homes in well-located areas probably don't see that. The younger you go, and also the more culturally diverse you go, where communities have come from overseas, where raising families in apartments is the norm, we start to see a greater acceptance of that. Interestingly, when you ask people why you don't think an apartment is the right place to raise a family, most of the answers come down to what is provided as part of that delivery. So there's not enough space for children to play. There's a lack of private outdoor space. There's limited privacy. These aren't things that can't be solved. These are design considerations. Very few people who answer that question do so with a view that fundamentally they disagree with apartment living. Really what they just see is that they've seen apartment living that's been presented to Sydney over the last 20 or 30 years, and they don't see that as how they can raise a family. What we need to do is start to normalise what great quality family-friendly apartments look like. and also the communities. And to Chris's point earlier, thinking about not just dwellings, but thinking about the communities, how walkable they are. What can you walk to? Can you get to public transport? Can you get to the local services? Can you provide the open space? A report we did, launched earlier in this year, provided a checklist for walkable density. What do you need in order to deliver great walkable communities? That's on our website for those who are interested in looking at it. Really, it's about informing councils, but also communities about what they should expect as density, both medium and high density communities start to reshape and redefine Sydney. What should be your expectation of what great density looks like? The answer isn't dwellings alone. There is a real risk in Sydney and in New South Wales and across Australia that if we chase dwellings as our single KPI, the only thing that we're trying to do, a housing target, that we result in delivering products that we know the market can deliver. 1 and 2 bedroom units built for an investor class that meet a dwelling target but don't meet a community need target. And so we need to be collectively pushing for what do we mean by density done well. Yes, it means dwellings. Yes, it means dwellings in the right place, but it means a whole range of other things. Chris touched on these. They need to be accessible. They need to be convenient. They need to be family friendly. They need to be multifunctional. They need to be places where you can have an older relative living with you at a certain time, and there's a space to do that. Place where you can work remotely if you choose. Places where you can go to school. Places where you can come home from and be great places to be entertained. Places where you can foster social and community cohesion. They're not optional extras. These are essential. If we want to create a new normal in terms of what density looks like in Sydney, we need to be putting down a markers for what we think and what we expect of density. What we also need to be, I'm mindful of my time, what we also need to be really careful is the false economies of racing to deliver dwellings at all costs. I'll just use 3 examples here. There is a bunch of land around well-located train stations that in some people's eyes might be low value use that could be better used to provide housing. Industrial land in well-located areas is often seen as low-hanging fruit to deliver more homes. Great, you can put more dwellings there, but what are we losing by replacing some of that land which actually keeps our economy functioning? We can also argue that we need to just make apartments just cheaper to build. Maybe we just need to reduce apartment standards so that we can deliver the dwellings. If our only KPI is dwellings complete, great. But when we start to think about, are these great places to live? Are these great places for families in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years to be living in? Is that an appropriate KPI for us to be setting? And again, maximising yield. Sure, we can hit 1 and 2 bedroom units. We can deliver lots of them if our KPI is dwellings completed. But maybe we should be thinking a bit more insightfully about how many families can be raising their kids and their grandkids in high density communities. How do we change those numbers in the survey that I showed before from people, probably I think it was about 50% or 60% of people thinking that that apartments are the right place to raise a family, to 70, 80, 90%. We normalise that. We see that in other cities around the world because we are providing the infrastructure to enable that. I'm not going to go into this chart, but I just want to raise the point that what I've just said is all great. The challenge we have is actually delivering it. The feasibility of particularly medium density development is an acute problem in Sydney. We risk not being able to deliver a product type that meets the desires, the multifaceted desires of communities when it comes to density because of particularly land prices. And we've had a big conversation in Sydney and New South Wales over the last 2 years about planning being the thing that's getting in the way of delivering homes. The reality is it's far more complex than that. And development feasibility, how much people are willing to pay for land and the return they get on it from the development, is going to play a really big role in determining whether or not we can deliver this or not. I don't have a solution to that, sadly, because it comes probably from about 200 years of a baked-in expectation of land being our sole creator of wealth in Australian communities, Australian families and Australian economy. That's a very hard thing to overcome, but if we don't overcome that, the challenge is that we don't make the decisions about building the types of high-density communities that we need. There's good stuff. There's slightly negative stuff in that presentation. I'm sorry. Hopefully the rest of them are a bit more positive to finish on. But I really wanted to make the point that doing density well isn't an option. Density done well is an absolute necessity if we're going to be a more resilient city, but also a city that fosters greater social cohesion. And so how do we move our mindset from a density as a downside to the density dividend, which I think is a really important part of what we talk about in the committee, and really highlighting what great density looks like, everything from walkability to diversity of place, to ensuring that the open space that is provided in these communities isn't done after the fact, but is built in and planned for as part of the design process itself. Ultimately, that comes down to the question of what targets are we setting? Are we just setting ourselves targets of dwellings completed, or are we setting ourselves outcomes that we want to achieve to ensure that we are delivering great communities through density done well? I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thanks for that great talk. And I think that we are weaving together a bit of a fabric here, which is covered in the basis of my presentation, which is density is necessary but not sufficient for health outcomes. I would like to check in and, there we go, sorry, necessary but not sufficient. I would like to check in and again acknowledge that we're on country today and acknowledge Indigenous people here and elders past, present and emerging. So I'm here to talk about density and health. Is this going to work? Yes. And a lot of that is encapsulated in a concept that I've been researching for about 15 years now, which is healthy built environments. So when I'm talking about healthy built environments, I'm not necessarily talking about where we locate healthcare services, hospitals and things, even though that's really important. I'm talking about the way that our cities, the places where people live, can be built, designed, structured, managed and operated to ensure that people can live their best lives, fulfill their potential, develop resilience and engage in the things that we know people need to engage in to keep them healthy. Now, you may be wondering, why is a person who is an urban planner by trade, up here talking to you about health? It's because basically the way our urban places are structured and managed do have a huge influence on people's health. It's empirically proven. At the moment, these are our main diseases that are costing our health system a lot of money, things like heart disease, diabetes and so forth. And along the top there, you can see the main risk factors for those diseases. Now, when I look at that, I see two in particular that are very much shaped by the way our cities are shaped. That's people's ability to participate in regular physical activity and people's access to healthy, fresh, nutritious food. But also there's this overlaying issue that are a set of secondary risk factors to a lot of those diseases. And that's things like stress, isolation, time paucity, the fact that we don't have time to engage in the things that we need to do to keep us healthy. And those things are also very much shaped by the way our cities are structured and managed. Now, I'm going to go into that a little bit in more detail. A long time ago now, back when I was at good old UNSW, I did a big literature review with my colleague Susan Thompson, who many of you may know, and we were looking for a really simple way to structure this complex relationship between urban planning and people's health. Basically, what we were thinking was that good planning, what I've been taught is good planning, and what I think we all know are good cities are also healthy cities. It's just that the health lens is a good way to get people thinking about what we need to do to make our cities better. So we wanted to structure this in a way that was as simple as possible, and we came up with these three domains: that good planning can get people more physically active, it can connect and strengthen communities, and it can give people access to healthy food. And you can see that those three domains respond to the risk factors that we're facing today. Now, going into that in a little bit more detail, when I'm talking about physical activity, about 40% of us don't get adequate physical activity on a day-to-day basis, which you might not think is that bad, but when you look at the guidelines, they're really quite minimal. It's about 30 minutes a day. It's a bit of a worry that 40% of us aren't getting to that level. So what can we do as urban planners to get people more physically active? The main one is active transport. So we can get people walking and cycling more, even using public transport more. We know that people who use public transport do more physical activity. Any city that is structured solely around the car, where the car is the primary mode of transport that is accepted as the social option, is not going to be one that's available for active transport. It's not going to be one where people are able to use transport that need to get from A to B as utilitarian physical activity in their day-to-day lives. So that's one thing that we can do. We can also make sure that people have access to opportunities for recreational physical activity. You know, safe bike paths, green spaces to go and run around with the kids, places to play, playgrounds, places for organised sport. All of those kinds of things are the essence of what it is to have a physically active community, and our cities are the things that are responsible for providing those things. When we think about access to fresh and healthy food, it's about giving people walkable access to the places where they can go and buy the ingredients for a fresh and healthy meal at a reasonable price. You might like to think that you have all these lovely taste appreciations and so forth, and that's what determines what you eat. It's actually more just determined by your environment. We eat what is around us, and if our environment is shaped by fast food outlets, convenience options, then that's what we're going to eat. If our environment is shaped by a small set of shops and services on the corner that we can go to buy some vegetables, that's more what we're going to engage in. We can also encourage people to engage in growing their own produce by opening up verge plantings, allowing for people to grow food on balconies, by supporting community gardens. That process is not only a process of getting people access to fresh and healthy food, it's engaging them in that process of growing their own produce and appreciating fresh and healthy food. In terms of community connection, we can provide people with places to sit and talk, places to meet, places to interact, and we can provide people with places to have time out, because the other side of connection is that ability to have time out, and you can't have one without the other. Now, going into that in a little bit more detail, that was just a very rapid fire sort of a tour. This seems to be not the clicker. Oh, there we go. Where does density come into all of this? So density underpins a lot of the things I've been talking about. The things I've been talking about, the active and public transport networks, the small sets of shops and services, the walkable neighbourhoods, the ability to connect and have interactions that are positive, all require some kind of critical mass of people. And density is what brings us that critical mass. Density is also associated with other health outcomes, things like exposure to noise, exposure to lack of privacy and so forth. So that's going on to a bit of the negative side of things. Density is also associated with crowding, with urban heat island. It comes with all of these health impacts that we also need to manage if we want the good sides of the density that I've been talking about. We need to make sure that we have equitable distribution of these things, including the density across the city, such that everybody has access to the green spaces, the public transport networks, the cycling networks, that they're not just crowded into one particular area. And of course, we need to make sure that we have good design. We need to make sure that people do have those acoustic treatments so they don't feel like they're living on top of each other, so they do feel like they can connect with their neighbours rather than feeling like they want to just go and hide away because they have no sense of privacy in the place where they call home. Now, to illustrate what this looks like, I'm going to take two particular examples. First of all, I'm going to be talking about density and children's active transport to school. Now, why does this matter from a health perspective? The most important one I think that we hear about most is that kids who use active transport to get to school are more likely to do adequate amounts of physical activity. That's a bit of a no-brainer. But there's all this other stuff that we've found from research that kids who walk and cycle to school actually get more intellectual stimulation. They do better on all sorts of tests, regardless of whether we control for socioeconomic status or other aspects of opportunity. They're the kids who learn how to navigate around their neighbourhood, the kids who learn how to interact, the kids who know which side of the footpath to walk on, the kids who know how to support an elderly person crossing the road. All of these things are associated with kids using active transport to school. In Australia, we've just done a nationwide survey of this, the most comprehensive ever, and we've found we're still at about 30% of kids walking and cycling to school in Australia today. Back in the 70s, it was 30% of kids being driven. So we've really tipped that on its head. One of the reasons that we've done that is because we're such a low density city. So if we think about what we need to do to get more kids walking and cycling to school, there's a huge list. You know, we need safer speed limits. We need adequate footpaths. We need lighting. We need the community to be on board. We need parents to be on board. We need school support, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. But the key one is distance. So a little while ago, I dragged my research team through the most horrendous systematic review process to gather data from 148 studies around the world. All our main research question was, how far do kids walk and cycle to school? And we confirmed what we already knew, which is what all good research does, of course. It's about 1 kilometre. That's not very far. So when we think about what we're doing with our schools in Sydney at the moment, we have a policy to increase the size of our school. We want our schools to be much bigger than what they used to be. The minimum standard is around 1,500 that we want, and 1,000 students, that's for high school, 1,000 students for primary school. Now, what does that do to kids' ability to walk and cycle to school? Well, look at Belmore here. Inner West area, density is around 5,000 people per square kilometre. That's what 1 kilometre looks like in Belmore. That's how many people, that's how many students live within that's what 1 kilometre is to get 1,000 students walking or cycling to school in Belmore. Pretty neat, right? But let's look at what happens when density blows out from that. This is Pymble. I've purposely picked non-Western Sydney areas as a way to sort of keep things civil. But so the residential density there much, much lower. And it takes 3 kilometre radius to get 1,000 kids walking or cycling to school. So that education policy, that's not an education policy. That's a transport policy. That's a health policy. That's a planning policy. And if we're going to make sure that we densify in a way that does support health, we need to bring those people, those portfolios together much more. Now, let's think about incidental interactions. So why does this matter? Well, we know that loneliness is on the increase, and it's been called something that's happening at epidemic levels in the US. I think their Surgeon General famously said that loneliness can have as much impact on a person's well-being outcomes as smoking. What can we do to address loneliness from a built environment perspective? So we have these level of connections that we need to maintain in our lives. They've neatly been formulated into 3. So we have our level 1 connections, the family and friends, people that we know. Level 2 connections, they might be our wider friendship circle or the people that we work with. And then there's this really interesting thing called level 3 connections, which these are the connections that you have with your community around you, the people that you meet and greet on a day-to-day basis. It might be the same person that you catch the bus with every morning, you give them a little nod. It might be somebody who you see walking their dog every day, and again, you give them a nod, maybe a smile, those kinds of things. And the research has shown to us that these level 3 connections are just as important for our health and well-being and making us resilient to episodes of loneliness as those level 1 and level 2 connections. So as I said, loneliness is definitely on the increase. The concerning thing about this graph is the increase that's happening in that early adulthood area. We've always considered loneliness to be something that's experienced by the elderly, but it's much more common now amongst everybody. It's a very subjective experience. So it's just this perception that your level of connection is not what you'd like it to be. That makes it very, very difficult to measure from the perspective of quantifying things. We use a lot of qualitative techniques to get to the heart of what shapes loneliness. But how can the built environment intersect with this? The first thing that we need to recognise is that just because somebody is alone doesn't mean that they're lonely. You can be entirely connected to your community and live a relatively a life that is relatively alone. I often use my dog to demonstrate this. She's a dash hound and she hates other dogs. So her level of connection required for a good perception of her degree of interaction is very, very small. My mum has a Jack Russell, loves other dogs. Her level of connection required is much larger. So we all have different scales of what we need. And we need to recognise that when we're designing our cities, because social isolation in our cities is a risk factor for loneliness, no matter what your level of connection is. What can we do to design our cities? First of all, we can provide people with places to talk. Some of you might know famous designer William H. White, who did this classic black and white video from the 1970s, and he has this quote in it that says that the one angle that architects most often ignore is the angle of the human backside. We need to provide people simply with places to sit. It's already been mentioned today that places to sit are the foundations of getting people to slow down and enabling those interactions to happen. But we also need to provide people with things to talk about. So it's not just necessarily having a place to sit, talk, interact, slow down the pace of the city. It's about giving people good things to talk about as they're interacting. That's why companion animals are such a great fabric for the community. But it's also things like a beautiful street tree, a flock of birds in flight. Those small things, those integrations of nature are what make those little social interactions, which we know are so important for our health, much easier in our cities. And again, we can see that density is a huge component of a lot of those things. Not just density, but density done well with the amenity, with the parks, with the footpaths, with the well-maintained spaces. So I'll leave you with that. Again, I think that I'll come back to where I started from the beginning, was that it's very much this idea that density is really necessary for all of these things that we are aspiring to so desperately for our city, but it's not sufficient, especially for positive health outcomes, but for the other outcomes that we're looking for as well. So thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jay. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the current planning manager at Cumberland City Council, and I'll be taking you through two words, density and amenity. Do they go hand in hand? I've got 10 minutes to prove to you they can, with the use of the planning controls to enable that. So a little bit of context about where I work. I work at Cumberland City Council. It really is a council which is the gateway to the West, as I like to call it. It's part of the Central River City Regional Plan. And we've got one of our major CBDs is Maryland, which is also a proposed strategic centre, which is pretty close to Parramatta. And if you look at the population growth for our council area, we are a growing population. We do have small families, and we are a growing population. So the current projection of population growth from 2021 to 2036 is almost 60,000 people. So what is council going to do or doing about it to cater for that increased growth in population is also what I'll take you through. Some of the planning controls that does apply to Cumberland is, as I said before, we're part of the Central City District Plan. And we've got obviously we've got a consolidated LEP in 2021, which is Cumberland LEP and the DCP. We're also got a community strategic plan and the LSPS as well. So those are some of the policy documents that we have at our disposal to deliver density at our disposal. So as I said, Marylands is one of our key centres. It's really our principal CBD. And I've got 4 sites there, which I'd like to take you through. One being the Coronation development that's recently been completed. 2 being AILA, which is in the process of being developed. 3 is the Maryland Civic Square, which is a open area, which council has developed. And 4, which is the existing Stockland Shopping Centre. So Marylands has got a range of varying heights and density. You've got buildings there which is as high as 100 metres with floor space ratio incentives of close to 8.5 8.5 to 1. So it's fairly dense. And, what we did in terms of our planning controls, especially when we developed the local environmental plan, is identify Marylands as obviously one of our key centres. And we identified places where we need that open space, we need road infrastructure upgrades. We identified entertainment precincts as part of the planning controls to make sure that the higher you go, that there is amenity provided within those developments to make sure that there is a sense of place, as we've, the other speakers have mentioned before. This is a newly completed development in Marylands, off Marylands Road, which is the Mason and Main development, Coronation. Over 800 apartment units have been delivered, and there are a variety of units, like the one-bedders, studios, two-bedder, three-bedder. As Jeremy said before, like part of the issue is to identify spaces where families can also move in. We've got a range of apartment sizes and bedrooms to cater for growing families within the Cumberland local government area. There's been over 75,000 square metres of grossable area that's been provided as part of this development. So it's one of our big developments that we've worked with the developer to provide. And the key thing is the public amenity that's been provided is an entertainment precinct, Eat Street, a lot of new nice restaurants that have come up, and also as part of that development, land acquisition was part of it, which was for road improvement works, road extensions, and also for stormwater extension works as well in the Marylands precinct. So as part of the development, council identified in the LEP that we need a bit of land that's owned by the developer to promote and identify that we need an entertainment precinct, we need road infrastructure upgrades to cater for the increased traffic in the area, and also for stormwater upgrade works, which is required to facilitate 800 apartment units in the area. So that was all and has been delivered as part of this development, which is now in full flow. The second development that's currently being undertaken is by AILA. And on this site, it's a staged development, and at the end of it, there's going to be 1,000 apartment units that's going to be delivered. And as part of the Cumberland LEP, there are controls where there is land that's been reserved for acquisition by council, which is the developer's land, which will be provided, where a public park will be provided, which is 0.5 hectare of public park. We've identified that obviously there is going to be a need for more open space as part of these developments, and we are going to get that land delivered to council at the developer's cost to make sure that there's amenity that's being maintained to the residents of this development and obviously of Marylands as a whole. So it's a fairly large park, one of the largest parks in Marylands that will be delivered, which is 0.5 hectare as part of this development site in AILA. So you're looking at roughly close to 1,800 apartments with these two developments alone in Marylands, which is a great amount of density. But what councils are doing about it with that density is making sure that there's amenity provided for those residents, not just in the apartment themselves, because obviously with the apartment sizes and the balcony sizes, the apartment design guide does provide a basic level of amenity that's for the residents, but outside of that developments as well. So you're talking about large open spaces, you're talking about wider roads, you're talking about better stormwater upgrade so that we can deal with things like traffic congestion, we can deal with things like flooding, we can deal with things like providing open space and well-being for the residents. The other landmark site that council developed in conjunction with the state government was a civic square right in the heart of Marylands. Now, it was opened in 2023, and again, the planning controls through land acquisition made this happen in the sense that there was land identified for council to acquire from the owners to provide for a civic square. And during COVID, there was a policy called the New South Wales Public Spaces Legacy Program, where the funding was provided by the state government to provide this civic square. So council worked collaboratively with the New South Wales Department of Planning to make sure that this got over the line, and it was opened in 2023. And there's a lot of people that sort of congregate in this central part of Marylands in the civic square because it's just it's just a very, very active environment, which is dead bang in the middle of Maryland CBD. So our community's vision through all our engagement with the community was, yes, we needed a public square. We needed a meeting place for the whole community, a space which is safe, a place for locals, and it's a unique landmark in the town centre. So we were very happy to deliver that in 2023, and the uptake on that civic square has been immense. So a lot of people are using that space as part of the whole improvement works in the Maryland CBD that Council's done. So that's just a snapshot of how it was in 2019. As you can see, there was an arcade type facility. Council acquired that land through the planning controls to deliver that civic square and to provide that high level of amenity for the residents of Marylands, because we identified early that Marylands was going to be one of our key CBDs, and we've ensured that there is land there to provide the open space, to provide the stormwater upgrades, the infrastructure upgrades required to cater for that higher density and the higher amount of people that are visiting those spaces. So, key takeaways, from what I've been talking about: amenity and density can go hand in hand if we all work together. And when I say we all work together, councils, state government, developers, landscape architects, everyone, we work together, we can get it done. In the past, and to a lesser extent now, thankfully, there's been a blame game that, the council's holding my applications back, developer greed, people are it's just a land grab, those kind of things. But if we all work collaboratively, we can do density well, we can provide the amenity required to cater for that density, and we can get a better outcome for the residents of the city to live well. And the answer to all of that largely is how you use those planning controls. Yes, it is complex. Yes, it can be very scary, just with all the changes in legislation that's happening. But if you use those planning controls and you work together, we can live in a city which is better for our future generation and our kids. So thank you.
So what I wanted to cover today is a bit of a personal journey, I suppose, of experience of density, both as a professional, but also as somebody who has lived and experienced some of the best and possibly some of the worst, maybe in some of the best places, of what density has provided to me as a citizen, and then how we experience that as professionals. So I feel like in some ways we're preaching to the converted in this room. I think we all are here to kind of fight the good fight for really high quality density. And this, I guess, is another call to action for us all to continue to do that. So what I want to talk about is this evolution of the Australian dream, I suppose, of living on a quarter-acre block in a city. So before I start, I wanted to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I am forever grateful for everything I learn from our First Nations partners that we work with, and for the willingness to walk with us, no matter how much, I'll get emotional, no matter how much has been done to your communities through colonisation. I think the willingness to walk together now is really special and something we learn from every day. So I grew up in Canberra. I lived on a quarter-acre block. It was, in fact, a public house, a public housing home, but we very much lived in our backyard. And I think that has been the experience of the lack of density in Australian cities. And it doesn't necessarily build the best community. Where I started, and I could only get a 1970s photo of this that was very grainy, so this is AI, apologies, is in the Northbourne Flats in Canberra. Now, those apartments have since been demolished. There was social housing issues. It was one of those developments in Canberra where public housing was all together in one place. And over time, as other policies meant that the people within those homes changed, there was social issues there. When I lived there, it was a community. I came from a single parent home, a single mother home, and the support of the community and the way that the design of those places supported that. So we had communal open space. We had a park to play in, a park with passive surveillance. We knew our neighbours because we lived in this community and it was safe to be there. And even though our apartment didn't overlook that communal open space, because we knew and connected to our neighbours, they would look out for the children. If something happened in the park, someone would come running out and say, is everything okay? Do you need to go back or get your mum? There was real community there. And that's something that when we moved to that quarter-acre block was missing. We didn't really learn to get to know our neighbours. And that was a really strong sense as a very small child, that there wasn't that place to go and play, to make friends, to connect with people, or for that support to be there, in fact, for my family and for my mother. I was also lucky enough in my older life to live in Carrabba Point. This is one of the most beautiful places in Sydney. We overlooked Sydney Harbour. We caught the ferry to work. Feel very privileged and lucky to have ever lived there in an apartment. But in 8 years, I didn't know my neighbours. There wasn't places where we could connect. There was no communal open space within those apartments. Nobody even went onto the balconies because they were really so exposed. So you enjoyed the views from inside, and the best that you got was a bit of a nod when you walked past in the stairs. There was really not a sense of community. So it's not just about beauty or expense. That doesn't give you community and connection. It can be a lovely place to live. More recently, only a few weeks ago, actually, we were travelling in Japan, and to some of Jeremy's points, we're really very lucky here in terms of our density, and we are extremely low density. And the intensity of those cities, and coming back to Sydney and seeing and feeling the green, the street trees and the open space is just literally a breath of fresh air to really feel that connection to nature and to realise how incredibly lucky we are to have that. With Nagoya, this image here is Nagoya, being a city that's about 1,400 people per square kilometre. I'm not proposing that that is density done well. I think that's density done because they had to. Whereas our Sydney metro area is about 420, Melbourne about 500, depending on where you draw these boundaries, obviously, and Melbourne and Brisbane about 350. So, to those earlier points, we are really not a very dense city, but we have a lot of fear around density in our communities. And I think it is because density hasn't necessarily been done well. So Copenhagen, the world's most livable city, as a good example of where density is done well, has that density of about 1,200 people per square kilometre. And as Jeremy was saying, it's not necessarily all about high rise, but about maybe intensity rather than just high rise density. And the provision of open space within those cities is really critical, and it is those elements of accessibility, what's provided, the quality of those open spaces. It's not about just how much open space is provided. So we have another really great thing to learn from here, which is our multiculturalism. So as we look and experience cities overseas, they're in a different context, and we know as designers it's very hard to transplant something from one place to another and say that it's going to work because we work with it differently. One of my bugbears, let's say, is that, and I will speak about that a little bit later, is that we don't always challenge why people don't use space. So as a landscape architect, we often get told, but no one goes there, no one uses it, it's wasted, why do we provide it? It just costs us money to maintain or to build. But if we don't provide the things in the spaces for people to do, or the reasons for people to go there, or the seats for them to sit on to spend time, then why would they go there and why would they stay? And that behaviour isn't going to change until we put the things there, the seats, the experiences, to see that behavioural change. And I think that how we analyse that and review the data and have some real tangible kind of backup for why it's important and what works is really important in our industry. But we have here a very multicultural society. We know that particularly in Western Sydney, there is a lot of people from other backgrounds who have lived in dense cities and do want to use parks and open spaces in different ways. But we're not always giving that opportunity for them to be able to do that and show us how we can live in these places in a different way. Because we all come from this background of living in our backyards and thinking that's the only way to do it. At a recent conference, I heard the comment that design is the problem with the housing crisis, that one of the reasons we can't build these houses affordably is because we spend too much time trying to design them well. Obviously, that irked me somewhat. But, you know, that's a perception, right? From developers and others, we're slowing this down. We spend all this time talking about design. Are we trying to increase their costs to be able to develop these houses because we're saying they have to provide this quality spaces? So I guess we need to kind of be addressing that and promoting why it's important. One of those arguments is that there's too many controls, that we put all these limitations on, again, push prices higher for development, and so they can't afford to deliver these homes. And we understand, you know, obviously that is an issue, but good design doesn't have to be expensive design, as I think was demonstrated where I lived as a child. There is some really good things, however, and as landscape architects, I think that others will probably have had this experience. When things like the Apartment Design Guide came out, it started to quantify the provision of private, public and communal open space in particular, and to give that value, to mean that it's not an optional extra. It is something that has to be provided when anyone does an apartment development. But still, the perception of those is that they are luxuries and not really a critical part of making those developments good for the future. So the question is, I suppose, that if we change the way that we change what we provide and we do push to provide more, then will we see that change in the way that people are going to use it? And I would posit that we definitely will see that change. So whether this is visible, you know, as professionals where we're working with developers, we also work with local governments on design excellence panels, where we see a lot of developments come through and we keep hearing these same comments about the provision of open space in particular. So if we take each item of open space, starting with private open space, what we hear is people just want to hang their washing on the balconies. No one ever goes on the balconies. Why don't people go on the balcony? Is it private? Is it protected? Is it just blasted by sun and wind and noise? Is it a shape that people can use? There is some really basic things in those design controls that are trying to say you can put a table on your balcony, the bare minimum of what you could do with that balcony. And yet we still see so many examples where those places, no, they're not used. They're not useful to the people. They are an additional cost. But we're not helping people to be able to use them. We're not creating those places where they can use it. So what is it that we can do? And yes, there is some cost in this to some extent, to green those places, to provide privacy, to offer a space that is a reasonable shape to put a table on, and to be able to use it in a variety of ways. How much do we put controls in place that limit how contained those spaces can be in different environments? If you're on a busy road, and we all know that developers like their GFA calculations, so, you know, enclosing or creating winter gardens, for example, become GFA, and then you can't enclose those places. You can't make them spaces that are usable because of those planning controls that limit what they're willing to do from a GFA point of view. So where can we be more creative? Where we need to, do we need to build these in more to make them more flexible spaces and allow people to use them to support their lifestyle? Another comment, same thing really. Residents never use the communal areas. We build these things. You see them everywhere and nobody is ever using them. But do we ever ask why? So many plans that we see come across, I sit on the Northern Beaches panel, for example, you know, that come across our desks in DAs that they're providing the space because the ADG says 25% communal open space. And they say, there you go, rooftop terrace. We're a bit worried about the waterproofing, so we're not putting any plants up there. You know, we're just going to give them some seats. It's great, communal space, right? People can gather here, they want to. Is this somewhere you want to go and dwell? This is in another city. I didn't choose one from here, by the way. Just in case the designer was in the room. I'm sure they were pushed by their client if they were. But, you know, do we really ask why? So there was a recent study done, and thank you to them, by the University of Western Australia, where they looked into this provision of communal open space and what's been happening more recently, because there is quite a lot of examples now that have been built all over Australia where communal open space has been delivered. But we still keep hearing, and this was recognised by this study as well, that people really aren't using it. They're not going out there and connecting and using those spaces, even where there's swimming pools. And again, it was not really to do with the quality. The key metric that came out of that was green. So if there was landscape, if there was green space on those roofs, if there was shade and shelter, particularly from plants, that was what made the biggest difference to whether people used those open spaces. So for landscape architects, that's a great challenge to us to keep pushing for the provision of green within these communal open spaces, and how really important that is to whether or not people use them. Clicker. The other thing is just what there is to do. Last week, I did a course on crime prevention through environmental design, and we went out to look at a practical example, and I was blown away by these communal spaces. They actually have an awful lot of green. They have quite a lot of communal spaces. Somebody is paying to maintain these things incredibly well. And when we spoke to residents, they said the only thing people do in these places is take their dogs down for a wee. Nobody stays here. There's not one seat. There's not one canopy, anything to do. It's grass. It's largely inaccessible. And people are not spending time there. You feel weird being in these spaces, like maybe, should I really be here? So it's not just about providing the place, but it's providing reasons for people to be there and connect to their community. And we met someone who was in this they have a fenced off 2x2 metre community garden, which is right near the car park in this development, which is clearly the piece of space they've been allowed to, make their own. And there was this guy looking at the community garden, and we were like, why are you here? There's all this space. Why have you come out of your home to this place when all of that is available to you? And he said, this place has a purpose. People care for this little garden. That's why I come here and look at the garden when I need to get some air. It was really quite a sad story. So what we try to do, and I suppose, I think that the landscape architects kind of inherently know this. So as I said, I'm probably preaching to the converted. But what we really try to drive with our clients, and particularly developer clients around these communal areas, is what are we providing that's amenity for residents? Why are people going to go there? Are they going to be able to sit down and take a meeting when they're working from home? Is there places for children to play? Is there communal gardens where people can connect and get their hands dirty and get that real attachment into the landscape? Is there activation that makes it feel safe? Is there spaces to gather as groups to enjoy? Some of those might be indoor or outdoor. Is there music rooms? Other things that you can't necessarily do in apartments because of that privacy and noise issues and those sorts of things. So how can you create those spaces in those communal areas to encourage people to go out and to connect and have quiet space and time as well? So in terms of public open space, just like height and density, it's not always just about more height, and it's not always just about more public open space either. We know that land prices are difficult, and we know that when we're building an increasing density, so for example in our Todd developments now, there isn't necessarily a lot more open space that we can grab to serve those communities. We need to make the most of the space that we have and make it really valuable. I think the examples of Copenhagen, Vienna and Zurich, which all have significantly less quantum of open space per person, but still are held as examples of livable cities for primarily in part because of the provision of the quality of open space. So it isn't about just how much, it's about how accessible, how high quality that space is, and how much it's integrated with your living, the way that you live in the city. So our public space and our communal spaces now become our new backyard, but they need to facilitate those activities that can happen. And happily, actually, Street Furniture grabbed this photo of a project, so their furniture's in here. There's a little plug for you, June, which is great. But this is exactly what we wanted to see. So this is a development in Pagewood, where there's obviously a lot of intense density coming in. And we pushed very hard with our client here to make sure that there was provision of lots of activity within and potential activities within these places where people could connect. We didn't really know, and what we want to do now is do some studies to look at how well this is used. We want to do that kind of post-occupation review, which I think we often miss out on when we do projects. It's we move on to the next job and we don't always go back to review, how did that work? How often is this used? Are people really using it? So it was really heartening to see very early on, this is a very new space, that people are coming out. They are doing exactly what we envisaged they might do, which is having a children's party out there under that canopy. So we're trying to provide spaces for individuals, for small groups, and for larger groups to be able to congregate in these open spaces. So just some examples there of the sorts of things. We want to bring in places that are usable for everybody. So children's play is probably a fairly obvious one. But also for younger people who we are often afraid of in open spaces, or we're afraid to encourage into our open spaces because there's this sense that they're going to be noisy or they're going to be doing the wrong thing. But they're more likely to be noisy and doing the wrong thing if you don't offer them something that they can really engage in and do. And what they want to do too is have a place where they can go and connect. And also that are friendly to our elderly, because those cross-generational uses are so important, where we can have our grandparents come and help with the children, but know that there's a bathroom nearby. It's really basic things, which is good for young people and old people and people who have had children. It's all of us. But, you know, such a tricky provision. And it's not that these things are easy from many aspects. So somebody has to pay for this, and in this case it was a developer, not a council. And it does cost more to an extent to embellish a park than to provide something very simple. And there is issues with continued maintenance for these things from council and local government point of view. So it is really important that we work in partnership and make sure that those things are manageable, because poorly maintained open space does often then deteriorate into problematic open space. So we need to work and make sure that those things are going to work for everybody in that chain of delivery and be able to be maintained for the community and really for everybody. But we know that when we create great places, that people do come. In this case, the Best Hub out in Blacktown with Bill, thank you, Bill, which was very much an unaccessed location prior to the Best Precinct being implemented there in the sports park, because it wasn't friendly for people to get there. So one of the things that had to be built in was the connection from Rooty Hill train station, so someone could come here not by car. And the activities for people to do who aren't only there for sport. So how could we broaden the community offer within that place was really important in what we delivered there. And you know, happily, what we see is that people are really embracing that and coming to this place and using it very actively. And again, this is an example of the canopy in Lane Cove. There's a lot of concern in the community that this would actually drive people away from the main street and the existing centre in Lane Cove. But what they've found through those post-occupancy surveys is that actually everybody is doing better for this development being here. People are spending longer. People come back out, they spend more time in shopping, they can take their kids to have a play and then they can do a bit more. You don't have to take them home. So it's really proving a very good economic driver of the area as well for everybody, not only for the people who are associated with the new development. And some of these poor open spaces end up a victim of their own success. They're so heavily used that we, you know, could really never have envisaged the amount of use that these spaces get. But that's a really great outcome, even if it means that the grass maintenance people don't like us very much. So just to sum up, it's really this need for high quality open space, whether that be private open space where you're secure, communal open space where you can give a little bit more freedom and you still know that you're secure, or public open space that we can share more broadly. It is really critical to how successful our intense urban futures are going to be. And the apartment metrics or the numbers of apartments is not going to be enough. We don't want to rue what we've done now in 50 years' time because we've created places that end up not supporting a quality quality of life for our residents. And that's our challenge, to work together to try and make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you and welcome back. I'd now like to welcome Christian Hampson, CEO and design lead at Yerrabingin. Christian will be followed by Street Furniture Australia's Head of Strategy and Innovation, June Lee Boxall. So thank you, Christian.
My language Womandika, Mapanyala, Christian Manaru Warang, Dagabu Mianga. I'd like to acknowledge Uncle's welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge the country that we are within today, and I will discuss that. I'd also like to thank the previous speakers for prefacing half of my presentation, so that's great. Christian Hampson, Manaru Warang man. Acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the thing that allows us as designers to create places for all people to have an accessible experience of country. So you've heard that connection is an incredibly important thing for our well-being. Well, within country, we offer connection and kinship to things other than people, which we've also heard is quite a nice thing. And for a man who has 4 kids under the age of 10 at home, sometimes connection to other things than people is also very cherished. Sorry, this thing is a bit more. So we all use this word country today when we talk about designing with country, and I'm going to talk a little bit about designing with country and its place within urbanism. I have been described recently by some very esteemed colleagues as an urbanist. When I was described as that, I had to look that up because I didn't know what it meant. But essentially, I'm a bit of an outlying urbanist, I'd say, probably more. But country is not just the things we stand on. We are within it. It is an incredibly complex system that has so many components, but is also the oldest living database in the world. And we are part of that. We, as people, are within it and we are connected to it. And we are also part of its storage system, how it is communicated to future generations for its legacy, and how we respond and learn and transform into future generations. So country is not just this place or the thing that you are on, it's the thing that you participate. And when I was growing up, I was always taught every time you spoke, every time you stepped, every time you breathed, you were participating in the system of country. So Yerrabingin, again, thanks to the previous speakers, comes from my grandmother's language. And it means we walk together. But actually what it means is we were first animals and transformed into humans. And then we were taught how to live in this place by walking in the footsteps with those with knowledge. And then in my culture, which is one of over 300 different cultures in the world, and we are a multicultural society within First Nations people, we believe that we were then taught those lessons and that those spirits transformed into the rivers, the mountains and the landscapes to sit there and hold that knowledge and continue to teach us. Excuse me for sniffing all of a sudden. So how do we design with country? You probably heard a lot about connecting with country, but for us at Yerrabingin, we are a bit of a rat bag crew of sometimes described as a weird design cult. But I think what we're really interested in is we have landscape architects, young architects, we have graphic designers, Aboriginal mural artists, and I like to see designers be critical thinkers. I like to make critical thinkers design things. I like to make artists think like engineers, and I like to have engineers think like artists. So that opportunity of how we blend our knowledge together sits within this system of country, and the opportunity to design with it, but also to design in a way that we transform the world rather than try and make an endemic romantic idea of what country is. So again, that idea of designing with country is one where we can all actively be involved in it, whether we are the developer, whether we are the designer, whether we're the person maintaining that landscape, or whether we're the people who take up place within that development. So for us, we start in this opportunity to discuss the values of place. So that is a great way to discuss when we master plan places. So for us, we look at these elements of country, not just layers or components, but elements because they define the place within country that we are trying to work with and how those things occur in a unique way and how they are connected outwardly, but also what is the opportunity for them to guide us back to this system of country. Once we understand that, at Yerrabingin, what we want to do is think about country as having 3 ecologies that are all interlinked. So that idea of a cultural ecology, a social ecology and an environmental ecology. And all those things are linked together. Our cultural practice, our cultural sense of place is how we understand it. but it's also how we continue to share it into future generations. We don't have a written language, so we didn't write songs and poems, but we did have dances and art, and we have songs and stories, and those things continue to tell people about what we've learnt from country and how we can look after it. And then this opportunity to think about that is a way that we can bring cohesion. So social cohesion can be found in country because country is multicultural. Acknowledgement is an invitation, it is not an exclusive right. We are welcomed by traditional custodians, but acknowledgement is your own emotion and your own action, your own participation in that. And then ultimately, those two things come together with how do we look after the place that we sit within, the environment. So how is that ecology one that we can interact with? How do those things make different opportunities, but also how is it sustained? So another thing we think about when we design with country in the urban environment is what is the impact? What is the outcome? So for us, we look at these four pillars of innovation, custodianship, regeneration, and legacy as the opportunity that country brings to improve our approach to designing our cities, which over 70% of us live in today, but currently in Australia, as of the last state of environment, less than 50% of our natural environment is native. So how do we combine those ideas together to think about how we design in the future? And the other way we get these great ideas is by sitting down and having conversations. But these conversations that we have with the Aboriginal community are not about what they want, but how might we? What is possible? What are the things we can do together when we think about designing? So as an example of this, this is a diagram you see there on the left of the idea of this system of a place, just in a simple diagram about all those elements and how they were occurring on this particular project at Harbour Park, which is currently essentially a car park of reclaimed land. And we will soon be transformed through this design process into something that will be both a social, cultural, and environmental ecology. But the thing for us was, as we walked to this site at 5 a.m. when we were part of the competition as a team and thought about the first thing that occurred, the first element we felt was as the sun hit that water, the first breeze that comes from the difference in temperature between the land and the water came across there. But this element of wind was a much maligned component of the design. It was, how do we mitigate it? How do we control it? Often water and wind and these elements are always controlled. But as we know, no elements can be controlled. So we took this as an opportunity to see this wind as the way that we should shape and sculpt and understand the place that we should start with in here and create the ecology that is resilient for hundreds of years. So again, this idea of innovation, rooftop farms, how can we look at our urban environment and instead of putting, solar panels across, agricultural land and all these things, or trying to grow heaps of food out in the Western regions, why is not our entire city a farm? Food security. But also, in this instance, we didn't just go, oh, what are the plants that grow in Sydney? We looked at this idea of permaculture. And so that place became incredibly biodiverse, but also incredibly resilient. 130k winds out there at Everleigh. And then similarly, the practice around how we were creating better quality water that flows out of the UNE Tamworth project into the river there, which is a river that it needs so much health and care, but also how do people participate in that? Custodianship. This idea of custodianship is not about us as traditional custodians. It is about how people participate in place. So what good is sustainability if no one wants to work with it? This idea of custodianship is how we see ourselves in our place, how we're reflected in it, how we relate to each other, and how we bring a unique participation. So all cultures, all people can participate in place and have this idea of custodianship for future wellness of places. Regeneration. Often regeneration is talked about as the way that we regenerate the environment. But as you know, as we've heard, regeneration has to be about social and cultural regeneration in places that we design in urban environments. Otherwise, we will continue to impact our environment as we have for more than any other time in history. So how do we regenerate social and cultural systems within places when we design them? And the last one for us is legacy. Legacy is not just about this idea of what we retain for future generations, it's how we ensure that we continually transform places. We cannot hold things statically in place and see that they are things that we must hold and keep in place, we must ensure that these things are transformed. And in both of these projects, the Powerhouse and the Riverfront Precinct, what people needed has been placed in these places and transformed. Still remembering what had previously happened, and in some cases, very difficult stories to share, but these are about a future legacy for everybody to enjoy. And we as First Nations people are interested in the future. Often there is much talk about what has happened in the past, and yes, we must understand what happened in the past, but the legacy of what we do forward and what we go into the future is something that we transform rather than just keep in place. So, as I said, Yerrabingan comes from my grandmother's language. It means we walk together. And when we design, we always ask ourselves, what sort of ancestor would we like to be? Thank you very much.
Okay, the final talk today is Streets, Seats and a Sense of Home. For those who don't know me, my name is June from Street Furniture Australia. Esther, I think we think alike because I'm sharing a personal story too. So my sister-in-law is a single mum. She has 2 young kids. She lives, for many years, she lived in a very small 2-bedroom home in Elizabeth Bay, a beautiful part of Sydney, as you know. She once told me her tiny home never bothered her because every time she stepped outside, she felt a sense of joy, and she relied on that feeling every single day, several times a day. I grew up in Seoul in South Korea on the 13th floor of a 15-story building. So I understood her immediately. Going outside was essential, and the way that experience made you feel really shaped the quality of your life. So home is not just a place, it's a feeling, and that feeling extends outdoors, particularly in dense environments. So in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to share why social infrastructure matters, how observation can be a powerful tool, and how small design decisions can quietly transform daily life. If homes become smaller and backyards become balconies, public spaces steps into the role of our shared living room. In this context, street furniture is not decoration, it is social infrastructure. And I can't take credit for this term. It's a term I borrowed from David Martin from his talk at last year's Westfest. David described the 3 colours of infrastructure: green, blue, and pink. Pink represents the social, the people. Social infrastructure works at the human scale, 1-to-1. It allows people to dwell and actually enjoy the space, spend more time outdoors. It encourages our everyday activities. It provides comfort and safety, and it makes cities welcoming for everyone. I enjoy sitting on grass, on ledges, on big stones as much as anyone, but as you know, this is not an option for many people, and an increasing number of people with an ageing population. The idea that public space should feel like home came from a research project called Homify, a 6-month collaboration with Sydney Olympic Park Authority and CM Plus during the height of COVID in 2022. Back then, the biggest challenge to address wasn't density. It was the feeling of emptiness. When the major events stopped, the precinct felt hollow and local businesses struggled. Homify set out to understand how a place built for crowds could also evoke a feeling of home for the people who live there. Steve Jobs famously said, "It's hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them." Apple's magnetic plug in 2006 is a great example. It did not come from surveys. It did not come from community consultations. It came from observing hundreds of people fumbling with bulky chargers. This small insight created a moment of delight that was unexpected for Apple users. And public space is no different. moments of delight can be designed into our cities too. Let me share 5 examples. In Hyde Park, we saw people balancing coffee cups on the ground or on their laps. What if a simple table can be attached to common benches? Suddenly, people can eat, drink, talk, work, relax, all hands-free in greater comfort. In Mortdale Town Centre, we observed parents splitting up, one child, one bag each, moving from shop to shop. Yet there was nowhere for them to take a break unless they bought a coffee. What if there were generous rest points with shade along the street? They would give people permission to pause without obligation. In playgrounds, parents were endlessly following their toddlers, sleep deprived and tired from being constantly on their feet. What if there were lookout tables where parents could comfortably sit, have a chat, have a coffee, and monitor their kids in comfort? This is a plug for you. So sun lounges face up rather than out towards the view. What if sun lounges applied the ergonomics of an armchair? People could lean back and take in the outlook. Finally, the pain point of devices. We've all seen children sit together but absorbed in their phones. Playful, colourful elements like cubes can provide subtle cues to look up and engage. Gently curved benches can also support better conversations. And multifunctional platforms invite different ways to gather and interact. Observation remains one of the most powerful yet underused tools in design. Next time you're out and about, I encourage you to watch out for human pain points. It's really fun if you try it. If you spot struggling, pausing, adjusting, compensating, you are possibly witnessing a fantastic opportunity to bring your own moment of delight. If public space is becoming our shared living room, we owe it the same level of care we bring to our homes, maybe even more. And that requires quality. Timu is real in public spaces too. Cheap reproductions might look similar from a distance, but the differences are clear. Imitations are rarely sustainable or carbon neutral. They rely on lower grade materials and more reinforcement. For example, a linear seat here uses 6 to 8 millimeters stainless steel sandblasted frame to achieve the minimalist yet strong effect. This level of precision is too expensive and too difficult for most copyists to replicate. Up close, details like spacing and tolerances are compromised. And for some reason, this manufacturer uses timber and metal together on the same bench. Comfort is reduced, clearances are wrong. In this picnic setting, you have to literally climb into the seat to get to the table. And the fixings are not flush for safety and tamper resistance. So safety should never be compromised, as you know. Even a simple seat divider needs the right proportions and rounding. And safety actually can be beautiful. This wine glass profile features softer rounded edges in outdoor tables. I saw some really sharp ones downstairs on the way here today. Quality is not a luxury item, it's an equity issue. Who feels welcome, who feels safe, who can stay, who must move on. We understand cost will always be a challenge, a shared challenge, but cost does not need to mean compromise. We develop products across different price points deliberately, using thoughtful ways to reduce parts and labour while maintaining the highest in quality. For example, a solution to go around a tree varies greatly in price, multiple times in price. And as I mentioned last year at last year's talk, sometimes the best strategy is to buy less, but to buy well, perhaps even buy once. Choosing products that last for decades with replaceable parts is one of the best actions we can take for the planet. So next year is our birthday. Bill's here today, Bill Morrison. Thank you for coming. You know, we've spent 40 years doing just one thing, street furniture. And the truth is we're still learning. It's a hard thing to do well. Our team has built torture chambers to test strength and durability. We've set bins on fire. We've studied bin chickens to understand their entry tactics. This was before my time when Bill and his team designed the monsoon bin. Collaborated with street and homeless communities, experimented with smart cities, achieved carbon neutral certification, observed and interviewed hundreds of people in parks, streets, train stations and schools. And this is how we continuously improve over time. It's a plug for Maryland's. So all of this serves our mission, which is to help our clients and partners bring lasting enjoyment to public spaces. Let's build cities where public space feels like home, offering countless small moments of delight, or micro moments, as Chris mentioned. I like that. Let's prioritise social infrastructure and choose the best in quality every time. A final thank you to Cumberland City Council, a great champion of local business, and to AILA, our national partner for 11 years. As a design-led factory, we are proud to call Western Sydney home and proud to collaborate with you through Westfest. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen and June. I'd also like to say it's our birthday party next year as well. So maybe we can have a joint gathering of some kind. I'd next like to introduce our panel chair today. And for the third year running, Joshua French, Chief Executive of Greater Sydney Parklands and a valuable member of AILA. Our first panel is a Q&A with our speakers. Over to you, Josh.
Everyone, panel members, please come and be seated. Good morning, everyone. For those that don't know me, I am Josh French, Chief Exec at Greater Sydney Parklands. We are a state government agency dedicated to the custodianship of some of Greater Sydney's most significant parklands. Fernhill Estate at the foot of the Blue Mountains, Western Sydney Parklands, Parramatta Park, including Wistaria Gardens, Callan Park and Centennial Parklands. We're a small and mighty team of 100 of park passionate experts, and some of them are here today, so welcome. I always plug the role of landscape architects. Our agency is only 5 years old, and the former Chief Executive, Sue Ellen Fitzgerald, who many of you know, is a well-respected landscape architect. And I think as a landscape architect running Sydney's park agency, isn't it great to acknowledge that the state government recognises landscape architects in leadership roles, and landscape architects in leadership roles is really a valuable tool. And I think it's just something I like to share when I'm in the right audience. Now listen, I am welcoming everyone back. Everyone was a bit naughty, went over time a little. So I do have to be a little bit stricter on the time than intended. There are some mics in the audience going around. And I would like to thank all our speakers. What a great array of stories and information sharing and personal perspectives. So thank you all. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. You didn't say these words, YIMBY versus NIMBY. but you were talking about a lot about change. And how do you balance change when some people mightn't like it?
It's hard. And I think it comes to a question ultimately of what sort of city do we want to create. You know, Christian talked about that in terms of being responsible stewards of the cities and the communities that we live in. You know, the city isn't just for us in the room, but for our kids and their grandkids. And if we're not planning for them, we're not doing a good enough job. And so that does mean that we need to make some hard decisions in terms of how do communities change. And it's hard when we're so used to a quarter acre ideal, having our own home, that notion of owning land has been invested and embedded in Australian post-arrival culture for 200 years. And changing that to say that, no, actually, just because, there is a mindset that you haven't made it in Australia until you've owned land. And not just the property, but land. And that's a really hard thing to overcome. And so I think thinking long term and thinking about how do we get our communities to focus on what tomorrow's generation needs, and having conversations with those communities about what their expectations are. I think the density conversation scares people because we've done it really badly in a lot of places over the last 30 years. When you actually show people what great density can look like and what it means and what it can deliver, and put people closer to opportunities, to schools, to universities, to jobs, whatever it might be, people start to see that density dividend. But it's making sure that they're seeing what great looks like and having conversations with them about why it's important to think about tomorrow, not just today. Hard to do, but super important.
Great. Christian, for you, I loved your ecosystem of country approach and thinking. And on the back of that question, how do we, as communities change, how can designing with country make people feel more connected to places, their neighbourhoods grow and change?
I think Uncle Ray Davidson, who's a Gadigal elder that works very close with us, talks about that country is everybody's, and I think that opportunity is there, and that it is an invitation. I think we can also connect outwards, rather than thinking of trees as umbrellas. We think of it as brothers and sisters and uncles and aunties, but also we think of them as hydrological machines. We think as buildings, as custodians of country, and I think we just need to be trying as many different new ideas. And maybe people think that country is about designing with it is about trying to bring something back. But being endemic is not, I don't even know what that means actually sometimes, because endemic, does that mean just before the bloke with the funny wig landed here in his boat, or is it 10,000 years ago? I mean, Western Sydney has evolved. If we planted the Cumberland plain back here today, it wouldn't survive because of a particular forest that's not overseas, thousands of miles away. So that idea of design with countries, we want to be part of amazing design excellence that allows people to access and immerse themselves in country.
Thanks. Jennifer, my sister's got 2 dachshunds, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think people often behave a bit like dachshunds sometimes, but tell us about what you think is the most important design or policy shift we can make to support healthy, active, everyday life.
Oh, my Lord, I thought you were going to just let me talk about my dog.
Well, you can.
Oh, gosh. Look, it's funny when people ask me, because a lot of my research now is about the links between transport and health and trying to get people using more active transport and less car dependency. And I always try to emphasise that idea that I mentioned in my talk, that education policy is planning policy, is transport policy, is health policy, trying to get those policy silos to talk to each other a lot better, not just in, getting people into the same room like we are now, but actually embedding that multidisciplinary cross-silo collaboration in actual policy is very important. So an example of that, one of the most important things that I think we could do to create healthy built environments here in Sydney is invest in public education. And I know that sounds quite left of centre, but you think about it, the school is the hub of a community. Communities need hubs. So that's what, when I say that density is necessary but not sufficient, it's not enough to just build a heap of buildings. You need to build a community around that. And a school is a perfect example of an opportunity for that. But in Australia, we have the highest rate of enrolment of children in private schools in any OECD nation because we've disinvested from public education. Now, the impact on that, on our communities and the way that our cities works is huge because kids who go to private schools have, on average, about a 3 times longer distance to travel to their school. Active transport use to get to that school, I think it's around 40% for kids who go to in catchment public schools and around 10% for kids who go to private schools. But it cascades from there. So we think about the community that that child is building. If they're going to a school that's 3 kilometres away from where they live, the birthday parties are all 3 kilometres away. The soccer's 3 kilometres away. Everything else becomes car dependent for that child and the community fabric gets eroded. So I use that as one example of cross-silo collaboration where we need to look and say, well, our disinvestment of public education is perhaps actually at the heart of some of these other things that are coming from that. And of course, there's multiple examples of that. I've just picked on one in particular because it illustrates the point. But it's that idea of looking sideways from the policy and the portfolios that we're used to looking towards to solve these problems to be a bit more creative in what we're doing.
Thanks.
Now I'll talk about my dog.
Oh, what's your dog's name? They always have funny names.
No, her name's Olive. Oh. And she's actually 12, which is...
We talk about it at lunch. Esther, we all work with tight budgets. From time to time, I believe tight budgets are so good because it challenges us to really think as designers. So can you share an example where a constraint like a budget constraint or site constraints led the design process to create a better outcome?
I think there's lots of examples and a lot of projects hardly have to cost anything. So a more recent example would be a school project where we had a budget cut, but we knew that surprise, surprise, but we knew that space was really important still for the school. And so as a team who were really passionate about seeing the quality, the basic infrastructure could be there, the parks, the spaces, a shade structure, but the embellishment of that space, the planting, the other things really couldn't be there. So we worked with that community to get plant donations. So people bought in plants that they didn't need for their gardens, or people from the school community were able to contribute plants to that. We got our team to go out and physically put in that space. So it does require that real engagement in a community at that very base level. But the enthusiasm for that happening and the connection that comes from doing those projects together as well is in itself really important, and building that school community around the process of deciding what was going to go in, people contributing to that, and then going and physically putting it in. And then the care and the ownership that's come from that, I think that is one of the best cared for play spaces now that I know of, because the school community were part of creating it. And so they have this extra level of care. Now, I agree about the investment in public schools, and I think the investment in the outdoor spaces in public schools is as critical as the buildings, and often it doesn't get its dues either. But, you know, if we are able to kind of go above and beyond, then what the community is actually willing to contribute to their own, you know, their own amenity and their own place is really powerful too.
Thank you. Jay, you talked about integration and your Maryland's example with entertainment, roads, stormwater. How did you, or how did council get that piece of gold for Marylands that created that inflow integration for Marylands?
Lots of working with the developers and the local community is the answer. Lots of conversations, lots of planning, lots of collaboration with everyone involved. As I said before in the talk, we couldn't have done it just as a council on its own. Like, we've been in conversation with the council, the elected council, with the community, with the developers there for a long time now. And we're starting to see the results of that. Because if you look at Maryland's 10, 15 years ago, it was completely different to what it is now. And that's involved a lot of work with the current council, with the former councils, because we are an amalgamated council. That's required, that's been done, like plans, revisiting the plans, scrapping this, working on that. COVID hit, so things are, were challenging then as well. So, but collaboration has been the key. Councils in the past have been sort of guilty for far too long sometimes, working in silos. And we couldn't afford to do that with one of our principal CBDs in Maryland's. The whole key to getting that sort of, the precinct activated in terms of a place was working collaboratively with all the stakeholders involved. And, pretty proud, like when I walked there, because I've been in council for 10 years, when I started to what Maryland's was to what it is now, pretty proud to have been a very small part of that. Communication and engagement and collaboration was the key, getting it over the line.
Great. And June, what we're hearing here is it takes time. So precincts are evolving over time. Communities are growing and changing. I think from your expertise, and I always love how you come back to maintenance, because that's the reality. These places have to be timeless and have to serve our communities. So tell us a bit about modular or flexibility, in our thinking for design for street furniture, how that can help places evolve over time.
We've approached our product development process as not designing individual products, but systems, a system of parts, because we understand that places have different requirements, different histories, different personalities, identities, brand identities. So we try to provide a unique solution using tried and tested parts, so you get the best of both worlds. And this is a strategic path that we'd like to go forward with. So I guess, and modular systems are great. You can create the 3-seater bench in some ways might be obsolete. It's the most antisocial configuration. So with modular systems, you can create curves for active spaces or passive spaces looking out. It's a great sort of way to really deliver on a site-specific solution. As everyone probably knows now, we're a big fan of William White. So was mentioned, we love movable chairs, but not many councils want to put the movable chair in right away. We did that for Sydney Olympic Park, and they've saved a lot of money having to bring in and out the chairs every day, which was great. But, we've designed our movable chair so that you can take the nylon skids and the caps off. So if you change your mind, you can bolt it down. So that kind of flexibility, we're also designing into our products as a requirement.
Thanks. Now listen, I'm off to the floor now. Are there any questions from the floor that you would like to ask our panel members? And if there is, pop up your hand and a mic will head your way. Don't be shy. Linda, was that almost a... Oh. Yeah, touching of ear. Anyone?
We have some questions from the live stream, Josh.
Oh, great.
Sasa Liang asks, how can urban designers and landscape architects create high-quality buildings and open spaces that enhance livability while preventing gentrification and ensuring the long-term availability of affordable housing?
Ooh, who wants to tackle that one? The old gentrification. Jeremy, that's got to be you to say.
I'll answer all elements of that. I don't know if I can answer everything. I mean, I think the notion that gentrification isn't inherently a bad thing. I think cities never finish. And they're never static. And I think we need to recognise that communities socially, but also from a built form perspective, will always be in a constant state of change, partly because social dynamics change, partly because building needs or family dynamics change, partly because the way that we need to respond to a changing climate needs to change. So I think this notion that gentrification is an inherently bad thing and change is inherently bad is quite, we just need to be really careful with that. I think the questions about how do we design to ensure that change comes in, often design has to respond to what the policy settings are, and I think that's where we can be really strong in laying down our expectations. And as I said in my presentation, rather than saying, oh, we just need to build dwellings, being really clear on a certain percentage of 3-bedroom units or 4-bedroom units for families, or to the point of how can you be more generous in indoor-outdoor spaces, in high-density apartments, or being really clear on what the affordable housing expectations are in a community. These sort of things, turning community expectation into policy, I think then starts to shape design. Without that, sometimes even if we want to do design in a particular way, we might be compelled not to because of what the requirements are placed on designers or communities. So yeah, that's probably my opening salvo on that. Let's be cautious about treating change as bad, because if we do, then we suggest that our cities are finished. And I don't agree with that.
One of the things one of our board members said once was, evolution versus revolution. That's what's happening here. And I think this kind of aligns, Jeremy, with what you're saying. The change at the right pace is welcome.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Does anyone else have any comments to add to that?
Told you I wasn't good with technology. I think one of the interesting things, or one of the interesting challenges we have at the moment, is this integration of affordable housing as part of the uplift to get extra density at the moment, and how we respond to that is really important from a design point of view as well, because equity is really important. And I guess that's part of the idea of gentrification, is the idea that everybody else is going to be forced out. So we have some controls that are going to require that integration of affordable housing, but then how that gets designed in so that the equity isn't lost in the way that it's designed. And there isn't still this divide of the affordable. And there is a fear, and as somebody who grew up in public housing, I find it really interesting to sit in rooms where people talk about the affordable housing people or the public housing people, and you think we're just people, right? We're all humans. We all want safety. We all want comfort. We all want our kids to be safe and have a good kind of equitable future. So trying to continue to sort of break down those barriers about that there's some other kind of person that lives in the affordable part. And we have an opportunity now, I think, to make that a positive shift, because those developments, like where I grew up, the issue was there was no mix. It was all affordable housing. So we're not doing that anymore, which is great, but we need to think hard about how we incorporate this affordable housing as we have all this uplift for the extra 30%. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how we achieve that.
Just to jump in on that, in the Herald today, there was an article about reducing the 10% affordable housing provision in French's Forest down to 3% because development wasn't taking place. And again, back to the point of, if you just use delivering dwellings as the thing that you chase, then you make short-sighted decisions about that. Putting less than 3% of homes around a hospital that can't meet its staffing requirements, because most of the people who work there live in the southwest and the western parts of Sydney, to try and get some landowners to see that their land isn't worth as much as perhaps they think it is entirely short-sighted. We need to be really strong on what those expectations are of what an equitable city and what equitable communities look like. Otherwise, we embed the fact that we're not providing that diversity of housing type for the next 60, 70, 80 years of that building's natural life and that community's life.
Great. Any other questions online or from the floor? Oh, we have one from the floor. Oh, we've got two from the floor.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Sorry to I guess, shift more the focus maybe to landscape architecture. I just wanted to understand, I guess, some of the European models of Copenhagen, I've got a lot of family in Athens that have, I guess, not these big swathes of open space, but, there'll be smaller squares and plazas and piazzas. How, and maybe this is a question for Esther or you, Jai, how important is that kind of mix of public space typology, the kind of the big open spaces to go play sports, but also those kind of small pocket parks and playgrounds that are maybe, or even, maybe they are private rooftop gardens. And I guess a two-part question, do you design them differently? Is there different amenity in them?
You are good at technology. I can probably answer the first question from a health perspective. So one of the key things in healthy built environments we talk about a lot is diversity, and it's diversity of access to all sorts of different opportunities to engage in healthy behaviours, physical activity, community connection, and so forth. So from that perspective, we need that diversity. We need to be responsive to what the community wants. And that may mean pocket parks in some areas. It may mean children's playgrounds in others, swathes of open space from a perspective of children's sport and things like that. So that diversity is entirely welcome. And I think the more that we can think differently about how we treat those spaces. I mean, traditionally, I think we've seen pocket parks as something to be looked down upon in terms of public open space provision, but you've got a 2-year-old, a pocket park may as well be, six ovals. It doesn't really matter. So that diversity is really important. I think respecting that and understanding that diversity in accommodating different communities' needs for physical activity is one way to justify using those spaces innovatively. When it comes to actually how we do that,
that would be over to me. I think the diversity is really important. I think one of the key things for me is that every place you have to try to maximise, because we don't necessarily have in the right places the open space that we need. So it's not distributed as well or as evenly as if we planned it all out from the beginning. And so it does mean that you need to look at every place individually and try and create some flexibility and to maximise how many users are going to be able to use it and what they're going to be able to use it for. And that goes for those larger spaces too. So I'm going to take Best as an example again because it's one that's close to my heart. But that is very much a sports facility. It's really important. It's a regional sports facility that's required. Schools need places to have their sports carnival. We need places for professional or semi-professional teams to be training and working. But to overlay the element of how the community can also get something from that, can use that space, can attend those places, can get exercise in a more informal way. The more we can overlay use for everybody and get the most out of those spaces, I think is really important. I do think it's really important when we think right from that private to communal to public, that we don't let any of those elements slip, because we use them differently. Your private space, you can open your balcony, your kids can be there, you don't need any observation. That's for a small child. In a communal space, it's still important. It's still private to an extent, and you can have a sense of safety. And then in a public space, you have to go there. So you need those levels of open space to kind of get the whole gamut of what people need to live with in a high level of amenity. So we shouldn't sort of let some of the smaller places go.
Thank you.
And one final question. Oh no.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you. Yours. Gotta be quick.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You went from being quiet to a lot of questions.
Okay. I guess I just want to raise the question or the issue of how much new public open space is needed when you increase these densities. I asked that question from the context of we now live in Marrickville, Inner West Council, and it's just gone through the LEP revision. And as a resident, I was quite keen to see what was actually proposed in terms of new open space, and virtually none. And I just think, well, there's two things. Firstly, there seems to be this attitude, you can't afford it. It's too expensive to do that. I would say it's too expensive not to do it. Really, some discussion around what is it reasonably acceptable. I know there's a adversity to standards, but in some sort of indicative provision of green open space per head of population, I think would help the discussion in this sort of situation.
Jay, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I might answer that. There's a possible misconception with land in Sydney and the reality is we're going higher, not sidewards. And if you go higher, there's actually a bit more land left over sidewards to provide that greater amenity. So in those examples I showed you before in the presentation, that land, that big parcel of land, were and are owned by developers. And as part of the LEP review processes over the years, councils identified the need for more open space. So we've put in controls there to acquire that land effectively from the developers to provide that open space, to provide that amenity with the higher density. So we're working with the developers where they will dedicate that land to council, but they will also embellish that land and park in accordance with what the community wants, because we do have large amount of community surveys and community engagement to actually what goes into those open areas. So it's about maximizing the use of the planning controls to deliver open spaces, because if you really think about it, there is actually space. If you go upward, there is space sideways to provide that open space and those meeting points. It's just about how you basically use the planning controls to get that level of amenity provided with those developments.
Thanks. Christian, do you have a closing for that?
Yeah, look, I think really interestingly, and this might be a bit weird coming from me, I suppose post-COVID, we worked on an amazing project down in Collingwood and Melbourne that had a huge glut of open space around these massive towers. And as you can imagine, during COVID, they were pretty dire places to live where people couldn't leave the building. I think the interesting thing about that is the type of open spaces, as Pip talked about, what do they do? What is their ecological function? And I think, Marrickville's an interesting, we're working on a project there about how people find and what's the social fabric of certain places. I've worked on schools where they wanted to design, as a green space outcome, a big full-size oval for primary school kids who would be much more having fun sitting in the, garden under a tree. So I think open spaces, and another good example for us, we work on a Redfern social housing design where one of the things the community were really interested in was about food infrastructure across all sorts of different areas for social getting together around food and sharing, cultural sharing. So what's the cultural fabric? And that actually the breezeways and the way that they were designed so that people actually came out their front door and talked to their neighbours. And, and teenagers don't usually like to sit out in the middle of open spaces. They like little corners and things like that. So the social structure, I think, can enhance the outcome of the green space. And I also think that, green spaces, like I worked on a project where, an AstroTurf oval was regarded as being part of the green space. And I don't see its ecological or environmental function from that. So I think we want green spaces, but also I think there are social spaces, there's cultural spaces that are all interlinked that make people's interaction into those even better.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time. So I am going to wrap the panel up for this one. Thank you very much to Jeremy, Christian, Jennifer, Esther, Jay and June. And please offer a round of applause for our fabulous speakers. Okay, I can invite you to leave. We're going to do a very simple set change. So this is going to happen on my left before I invite the speakers up. But I would like to take this opportunity to give a huge shout out and thank you to the team at Street Furniture Australia. Without them, today would not have happened. And isn't it great we have someone like Street Furniture Australia here in Western Sydney and supporting our industry and hosting us today. I understand that you are one of the longest standing AILA partners and with your 40th birthday coming up, a constant supporter of our industry. For those who haven't been there, head out to their factory. They build in Western Sydney. They understand the setting, they understand the environment, and best of all, you can go out and see your product being built. So it's a welcome addition to go and see it. So please, I encourage you all to choose local and all to support our partners, including Street Furniture Australia. And I would like to officially thank you for today. So thanks to the team. And then my last plug is, as Natalie said, this is my third year. I told June that I'm not doing it next year. She needs to find someone new to host the panel. I said people will be sick of me by now. So if you would like to do this next year, please speak to June. And she's looking for a new one. Do you want a 3-year term again, June, or are you open to... It's a... Okay, so we've just got 30 minutes between us and lunch. So I would like to invite our next panellists up to the stage and we'll be just continue our discussion. So please welcome Bill Sakalos. Bill is the City Architect and Director of Transformation at Blacktown City Council and has extensive international private and public sector experience. Many of you will know him, and he has led many transformational projects for the City of Sydney and for the 2000 Olympics. In 2018, Bill was appointed to lead Blacktown's transformational response in response to its rapid growth. So welcome, Bill. Natalia Krisiak, I should have practiced these surnames, so I'm sorry if I get them wrong, is founder and creative lead at Cities for Play. A practicing architect and play consultant, Natalia specialises in the design of child-orientated environments and was awarded the Churchill Fellowship in 2019 to explore best practice designing child-friendly, high-density neighbourhoods in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Canada and the UK. Welcome. Nicole Carnegie, did I get that right, Nicole? Sort of. Come up to the stage, please. Executive Manager, Community Life and Activation at Campbelltown City Council. Nicole has spent her career creating and advocating for vibrant, people-focused places in Western Sydney throughout her various roles in local government. She has a degree in both business and urbanism with a passion for urban planning that started way back as an avid Sim City enthusiast. Great. And Mark Egan, finally, City Strategy Manager at City of Parramatta. Welcome, Mark. Mark is working towards making Parramatta a socially and environmentally sustainable community and using strategy as the vehicle to deliver this outcome. He's currently updating Council's community infrastructure strategy and developing Parramatta's climate resilience and adaptation plan. So welcome. Good to see you all. Mark, I'm going to start with you and talk about the role of Parramatta. And everyone's walked through here. I don't know if you've been here lately. Parramatta is incredible. I love coming to work here. We have an office here. So tell us about the work you're focusing on at Parramatta at the moment.
Thanks, Josh. So
no pressure.
No pressure. So probably the main thing that my team's dealing with at the moment is the community infrastructure planning. So thanks to June for mentioning social infrastructure. I think the first time I heard the term was when she spoke. One of the big challenges, I think, and the big things to face in providing density is community infrastructure and what people need to live a good life. Probably the central concept around that is that third space idea, that if home is our first space and work is our second space, where do we spend our time for the other third, I guess, or in the third sense of our lives? So a lot of planning has gone into our community infrastructure strategy, and it's essentially asking the question, if we're going to have this much growth in the next 20 years, what do we need to provide? And that covers all the infrastructure types that councils deliver: libraries, community spaces, recreation spaces, the challenge just spoken about a moment ago in terms of the provision and how we measure open space and what it needs to do. And so that's one of the big focuses of our team at Parramatta. And the other thing probably is the challenge of providing the right type of density for who is living in the city. Most Western Sydney councils will find that their primary household type is families with children, and that's no different in Parramatta. But what we see with development when high density changes and emerges is that we're not getting the same provision of larger dwellings. And so that has spilt out into a number of pieces of work in our team. Some of that work is with Natalia and with population health at Western Sydney Local Health District in looking at how we make high density healthy and how we make it particularly meet the needs of families. So they're probably the two of the big things.
Great, thank you. And Nicole, as Mark's former boss at City Parramatta, how's he doing, do you think, with those strategies?
No comment.
Yeah, okay. Tell us what's going on down in Campbelltown.
Interestingly, we are facing a similar challenge around community infrastructure. That is also a focus for our team. We recently conducted over many months what we called performance testing of all of our community infrastructure. We've then looked at multiple industry standards and benchmarking. We've conducted a gap analysis, and probably no surprise to many in the room, we're not going to meet the community infrastructure needs for our community by 2046 based on the growth that we're experiencing. So for us, it's looking at how we can start to bridge that gap, knowing that, as we've heard today, how important community infrastructure in the public domain is for particularly dense communities.
Thanks. Natalia, can you tell us a bit about what you do and your work, please?
So I advocate for better environments for children in the built environment. I'm an architect and play consultant, so quite a unique little pocket. And I mean, the reason why I'm so passionate about this topic is I have a similar story to Esther, which was quite a surprise to me when I saw her presentation. But I grew up in a high density sort of collection of apartments in Europe. And we had the most amazing childhood. All of the apartments were facing into a courtyard in the middle, and we would spend the afternoons playing in this communal outdoor space. We could walk to school because everything was high density and walkable. And then at the age of 12, we moved to Western Australia, and we lived in a detached dwelling. And my parents were so proud. They had this detached dwelling with a beautiful backyard. And yet for us as kids, it was like we honestly felt like we've arrived in a prison because we couldn't walk any longer. We were driven everywhere. So all of a sudden, our freedoms and our ability to move and play as independent, small human beings was completely constrained. And that to me really formed my whole career from that, because I felt so strongly about the built environment as a child, and I knew that somebody was needed in that space to advocate for the needs of children in the built environment. So I write lots of play strategies for local councils. I work with schools, early childhood settings, but also state governments. And most recently, as Mark mentioned, we wrote the first ever Australian guide for family-friendly living, high-density living, which was a huge achievement with the Western Sydney Local Health District.
Is that publicly available?
It is. Please download it.
Right.
Yes.
Where can people find it?
On the Western Sydney Local Health District website. It's there. Available.
Great, thank you. Bill, welcome. I was so impressed when Blacktown Council created your role, creating a city architect and a director for transformation. So tell us a bit about your top priorities for Blacktown.
So the things I struggle with, there's probably three things in terms of, working in an LGA that is rapidly growing. It's at 450,000 people, predicted to grow to over 600,000 within a relatively short period of time. I think the first thing that I struggle with really relates to the idea that we can have growth but not make provision for social infrastructure. And so you look at state policies that identify the areas, provide us with planning diagrams to show street layouts, but there's no provision for either the capital expenditure required for the social infrastructure or for the provision of the ongoing recurrent funding required to maintain them. So it's things like it's libraries, it's community centres, it's public open space, it's parks. That to me sort of is something that I really struggle to come to grips with. It. We do our best. There are programs like the Western Sydney infrastructure grants, which are delivering the capital, and some of that is going to those sorts of projects, but there's no ongoing funding to operate and maintain those facilities. And to give you an example, we have 7 projects through that grant funding worth $273 million, the recurrent cost of those projects is 28.5 million each year. So that's a big shift for any council to maintain. The second area that I think a lot about when I think about growth is comes down to designing for climate. And I think about it in the context of buildings because I'm an architect, but I don't limit it to that. It is really about designing for climate in Western Sydney where the growth's occurring and where in summertime we're often 10 degrees hotter than the eastern seaboard. So we spend a lot of time thinking about designing our streets and our parks and our public places to help mitigate that climate. And, we've invested in work that has identified the risk of not planting trees in streets. So if you think about the framework that we do our street designs in, there's a limitation on, you can only plant a tree that won't grow more than 100 millimetre diameter adjacent the street. It's just absolute nonsense because you have no ability to control how a tree grows. What that means is people end up planting bushes alongside streets. So we've identified that risk and looked at it as a whole of community perspective, where we've identified the impact on health, on pedestrians, and taken it from a view that takes in the whole of the community, not just the safety of the driver on the road. And then I think the third area that occupies a lot of my thinking is around connectivity. So it is around how people move about our precincts and our areas. And I did reflect on Jeremy's diagram with the squares, and I tried to sort of do a quick count, couldn't quite get it right, but it looked like there was at least maybe 2.5 times as many squares on the eastern side of the Parramatta axis than what there was on the west. And I get the fact that the square has to be bigger in the west because things are more dispersed, but what troubled me was the number, the difference in number. So what that means is the ability to move around in western suburbs is very limited, and you are totally reliant on cars. And what we need is really infrastructure, be it light rail, be it metro, even bus services that are programmed for greater frequency, but they need to move both longitudinally and laterally rather than just radially. So they're the sorts of things that sort of are of concern that we try and deal with.
Yeah, I mean, one of our biggest challenges at Parklands is financial sustainability. The ongoing operations of any of our assets is so important, and my portfolio, part of it's fully funded. Actually, Western Sydney Parklands is funded for the next 100 years through a very sophisticated leasing arrangement, which all that money goes back into the Parklands estate. And having the ability to continue to maintain is critical and a real challenge, I think, for all of us. What are the other challenges that you're facing, particularly in councils, in your work that you're doing? Should we start with you, Nicole?
We might sound like a broken record, but honestly, I mean, we have a number of challenges, but thinking about the conversation today, I think for Campbelltown Council and a number of my council colleagues, infrastructure, maintenance and renewal is, the funding for that is a real challenge. We've had chronic cost shifting from other levels of government to local government. We're constrained from a rate pegging perspective. So we're at the point now where some of our playgrounds, as a immediate mitigation measure, we're having to just tape off because we don't have the funding to just maintain infrastructure.
In the time I've been at Campbelltown for just over a year now, we've had multiple VPAs handed over to us, which are great. But the first thing we're thinking is, wow, how are we going to actually maintain this infrastructure for the community? So for us, a real challenge is that infrastructure maintenance backlog. And that's not even talking about new infrastructure for our community.
And Mark?
Same.
Yeah.
I'll elaborate one different point. One thing that happened not long ago was they developed the Housing Development Authority. And one of the impacts of that has been that the power has been taken away from council to negotiate voluntary planning agreements through what would normally come as applicants to council to develop quite high value sites with quite high potential for community infrastructure provision. I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but I think it was in the order of $200 million of potential lost value as a result of that change. And that means, things that we've planned to deliver won't be able to be delivered as a result of that type of shift. Because the state government, I'm sorry if there's anyone in the room from the Department of Planning, but they've made it very difficult for councils continually to be able to meet this challenge. It's a real challenge for council. All the issues that Nicole mentioned are very much front of mind for Parramatta as well. Like West Invest, the huge infrastructure funding opportunity was a massive game changer to get stuff built, but that's in some ways the easier part of the challenge. Getting the capital upfront cost is one thing to solve, but the operational cost of facilities is huge.
I won't take offence. Parklands is in Crown Lands and Public Spaces as part of the department. And I do know there are some departments.
You weren't my target, Jonathan.
Yeah, I don't think I'm your target person. I'll just throw Natalia to you and then we'll go to the floor for any questions. So if you've got anything, get ready. Tell us what you think local governments can do to ensure healthy spaces for families and children are prioritised, particularly when density is happening fast and sometimes out of council's control.
Yeah, I think councils can do a lot in terms of, I guess there's two scales that I like to talk about, the building scale itself and then the neighbourhood scale. So two sort of separate scales. With the building scale, you talk about designing better apartments. Obviously, the council has limited control over that, and that links very much to the ADG, which is virtually silent on the topic of families with children, which is a very strong policy issue. But local councils and City of Parramatta has championed this quite significantly, is trying to embed incentives for family-friendly apartments within their sort of local planning documents. But in terms of the neighbourhood itself, it's also thinking through strategies of walkability. So something that Jennifer touched on, making sure that children are right from the beginning of new neighbourhoods or even existing neighbourhoods. We think about how children are going to move through the space, making that a priority. Making sure that we have a diversity of play opportunities for children. So not just thinking about the playground as something that you select out of a catalogue, but thinking a little bit in a more sophisticated way about play, not just for the toddlers, but for the middle childhood ages, and then the youth also, and older children, and how we might provide for a diversity of different play opportunities beyond just the standard playground or the standard skate park also. So thinking about diversity of play, sophistication around what play provisions we are providing, and also around housing and how we can really enhance what the state government is not doing, which is not planning any sort of policy around family-friendly needs.
Thank you. Does anyone from the floor want to ask a question? Oh, Linda. Oh.
Hi,
Linda.
my name is Vaishali. I work with the City of Parramatta and I work in the city design team. So we do urban design and public domain. So this is a question actually for anybody. Recently, so we do a lot of DAs and we're seeing a lot of applications where they are either SSDAs or going the HDA way. And we're hearing from developers or from colleagues that they've sort of been told to ignore the DCP, ignore any of the council requirements. And so we're finding it really hard because we've really put in a lot of effort in writing our DCP and making the public domain and the public areas like social infrastructure and the parks and everything to put them down as what's required and the VPAs to get some things delivered through the VPAs. But what we are noticing is that the developers are sort of like been told ignore everything. So how do we address that? Because we are talking about doing density right, and there is a lot of density happening, but if you're going to tell them that don't pay any attention to everything else that's required outside the building, how do we work with it?
Bill, can you share a pearl of wisdom? I'm not sure we'll be able to answer it. Oh, would you like? Yeah, well. Bill.
The floor will answer. Good question. Very good question. As there's obviously more applications going through the State Significant Development Pathway and the HDA, strictly speaking, for those applications, DCPs do not apply. As a result of that, developers largely can work with the department just to sort of say, well, it's a DCP requirement, it strictly doesn't apply. But as part of the process, they are now holding, this is the department as well, they are holding sort of initial meetings with council. It's true with us as well. We've got one next week where we will be sort of saying that, you know, these parts of like the controls for that site is non-negotiable. The only thing we can do is try to push that, you know, these are non-negotiable, and these are probably, we can probably look at potentially relaxing our stance on those. But yeah, it's those meetings and it's the comments that they seek that we probably have to sort of say, no, these are non-negotiable items that council wants to see, and it's probably better if it's backed by, you know, a council decision as well.
Thanks, Jay. Oh, do you want the mic too? Just yell.
Oh, no. Hello, everyone. I'm Virginia Waller, Blue Mountain City Council. I'm an architect. Today's discussion's been great. So many thoughts and ideas floating. But I was just going to say, with, you know, you get issues and you get budget constraints, and then you get the budgets, you get the value managed engineered design solutions going out the window. Wasn't the point of design excellence panels, they mandated you know, good design principles, so that's where we can control what developers actually do and bring things under control. That was my idea of the design excellence panels. Does anyone have a comment on that, how that's working?
Bill, why don't I come back to you? Yep. And can you close that and just share your thoughts?
Yeah. I'll just go back to the earlier question and just say that it's really important to be very clear about what's important and not to get distracted by the detail. So when we deal with developers who are coming in for large scale development, we don't argue over you know, the colour of the brick or the colour of the timber. It's about getting the big moves right so that from an urban design perspective, you get, you know, access to the sunlight, access to the public space. You get decent areas where vegetation can grow. So you've got to get those big picture things right. You can't let go of those. You've got to be insistent on those. The second point is that if projects go through the State Significant Design Review Panel, that's an incredibly robust process and it is very effective. I've been on that for 7-8 years now, and it ramped up really quickly, and it is a really good system, and it's respected by developers, so they respond to it. So I think there is hope there, but I think clarity is really the thing to get right. On the design excellence front, the reality of working in the public sector is you have budgets, and certainly our WISIC projects, our 7 of them, they're all being worked. Council said to us on day one, we will not be adding in any more capital on these projects. And so we've had to work those to the budget, and it is a process. Design excellence comes in many forms. It doesn't necessarily mean you use the most expensive materials, but you get all the architectural decisions right in terms of configuration of buildings, how they respond to their surrounding environment. You pair it back to what you can afford. We all live within budgets, whether it's on a domestic front or sort of in a project delivery perspective. So you've got to respect that.
Thanks, Bill. Linda, final question with you, if you would like to. And then I'm going to come to the four of you, and on the theme of today, designing for density, in 30 seconds or less, one pearl of wisdom you haven't been able to share that you want to share with the audience.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you, everybody, this panel and the previous panel, too. I've just been really reflecting on Christian's diagram of the three ecologies, and also Jennifer's comments about the need for state agencies and all of us really to work as cross-disciplinary and cross-professionally as we can. And in relation to our advocacy for open space, I think we need to be more multidimensional in the way we think about it, because I believe when we're talking about open space, recreation, active recreation, passive recreation, and that's it, or where people can go and sort of do things. But I think we forget about all the other ways open space performs and is so important for us: clean air, clean water, exposure to nature, reducing urban heat island effects, contributing to our health and well-being. All of those things have economic value, as well as just the fact that there's an open space there. And I think the challenge for us as open space advocates is, how do we advocate up to government agencies, or the points at which policies are being made that you all at local government we're dealing with the policies, we're working within the controls, but how do we get up and get those changes made at higher levels? And how do we get that message across, rather than just saying, well, we have to do this because this is how we're working and this is what we work within.
Thanks, Linda. That's a great reflection. Mark, your pearl of wisdom on designing for density.
I think it's always that we've got to think about who are we designing the density for. I think that's a lot of the work in my social strategy team is trying to impress upon planners that we're designing spaces for people. And I think probably speaking to a group of design industry experts, that's probably a given, but it's not always front and center. I think linking it to the open space issue, I think one of the big challenges is working out how do we work out what the right amount of open space is. It's always a consideration of a network, right through from your giant sports fields through to your tiny pocket parks. And it only works if there's a network. And the big measure probably is, can people get to open space? And there's also a tree model that I forget the exact science of, but it's about how many trees can you see from where you live, and then how many trees are within a vicinity of where you live, which is supposed to be a good measure for access to, I think, tree canopy. But designing for people, thinking about people as the center of density, I think is the key.
Nicole?
I think for me, it is to be bold and to be brave. Prior to working at Campbelltown, I was at Parramatta for 13 years, and I always get really frustrated when people say Parramatta was this overnight success. It wasn't. It was a lot of us working really, really hard and being quite bold and brave. Often people thinking we were crazy with some of the decisions that we were making. So I encourage everyone to be bold and to be brave. That's really the only way we will see change.
For me, we've spoken a lot today about public open spaces, but I think something that's maybe been lacking a little bit in the conversation is semi-public spaces, so sort of strata type of open spaces, and in particular how that links to the ability to provide open play space and spaces for families with children. One of the key things I think is missing from our state planning policy is the provision of mandatory play space within developments, something that they do in London, Toronto, Vancouver, all around the world. Cities are mandating the provision of playable communal space for every development for the developer to provide, and that's something that we could easily do, today into our planning policy with very minimal financial impact, and it would have a huge benefit to families living in apartments. That's my little thing for people to think about.
And Bill?
I think you've got to think of what you do as a bit like mixing a good cocktail. You've got to have the technical side right. You've got to get the configurations right, but then you've got to add that magic ingredient, and that's fun. So if you add that, it'll permeate the project. And point to the example that Esther showed of our BEST project. There's the canopy we did at Mount Druitt. People relate to fun, and you've got to bring it to the project as designers.
And mine is green is powerful. Do never underestimate the value of a tree. I say to people, find as many places for trees as you possibly can. Make sure it's the right tree. Make sure it's going to grow. Make sure it's going to be there for the future. And a green landscape, it's come up in a lot of discussions today, is cooler, it's more beautiful, it's more contemplative, it's more people focused, and it celebrates nature. So please look after trees, whether they're already growing or you're going to plant some new ones. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our panel. I'm only a couple of minutes late. So I would like us all to thank the panel, Bill, Natalia, Nicole and Mark. And we are going to stay here. And I'm just going to invite Natalie up to close.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Josh and all of our speakers and panelists today. And as I just said, that concludes our session. Today's talks and panels have been recorded and will be available for AILA members as modules on our website. And a link will also be sent to anyone who is registered with the live stream. For landscape architects and architects, CPD points and details will be sent out to those who attended as well. Whether you've joined online or joined in person, thank you so much for coming today. Let's keep the conversation going outside. We can have some lunch together. I'd encourage you all to tap someone on the shoulder. We're all here to learn from each other, be inspired by each other, ask some questions, generate some content. I'd also like to go back to the beginning because I started it, and I get to come back to some of the very first things that we talked about from Uncle Graham. Let's look after each other. Let's design for better density. Let's do better policy. Let's advocate more. Let's all be a tree. I think we could all be a tree. We can be many trees, and we can make many ripples and movements. My team know it. I always say it. Let's change the world, even just a little bit. So let's be inspired. Thank you so much for coming today. Let's also offer up a round of applause for everyone who's done something in the background. It's a lot of fun.